the drugs in the hose?
Well, that's the problem. Usually, that's how he saw me.
Werte Kolleginnen und Kollegen, nehmen Sie bitte die Plätze ein. Zuerst eröffne ich die Ausschusssitzung und stelle fest, weil mir keine Änderungen vorliegen, dass die Tagesordnung so angenommen ist. Dann kommen wir zum zweiten Tagesordnungspunkt. Es stehen uns heute alle Sprachen zur Verfügung, außer Estnisch und Maltesisch. Und Maltesisch möchte ich noch mal ganz besonders entschuldigen. Und auch Kroatisch steht uns heute nicht zur Verfügung. Dann haben wir Rückmeldungen, Berichte von Delegationsreisen. Einmal CBD, COP11, Delegation nach Hyderabad und auch die 18th Session of Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Doha, wo wir als Umweltausschuss auch eine Delegation hingeschickt haben. Wie immer kann man sich die Berichte in schriftlicher Form auf der Homepage des Umweltausschusses anschauen. Dann habe ich mitzuteilen, dass wir am kommenden Donnerstag zwischen 9 Uhr und 10.30 Uhr eine Sondersitzung abhalten, zusammen mit dem Gesundheitskommissar Borg, und zwar zum Thema Horse Meat und die Lebensmittelkette. Insofern, dafür gibt es eine Extrasitzung am kommenden Donnerstag von 9 bis 10.30 Uhr. Und damit kommen wir auch schon zum dritten Tagesordnungspunkt, zum wichtigsten Tagesordnungspunkt, zu unserem öffentlichen Anhörung in Sachen Tabakprodukte. Und hier freue ich mich, dass wir sehr viele Referenten, kompetente Referenten da haben, aber auch die irische Ratspräsidentschaft mit dem irischen Gesundheitsminister Herrn Riley und unserem Gesundheitskommissar Tonio Borsch. Das zeigt, dass diesem Dossier sehr viel beigemessen wird, und es ist eines unserer wichtigsten Dossiers und hat auch schon im Vorfeld für sehr, sehr viel Aufregung gesorgt. Und wir als Parlament haben darauf gedrängt, dass wir möglichst früh, möglichst schnell diesen Vorschlag bekommen, damit es überhaupt noch möglich ist, in dieser Periode dieses wichtige Dossier abzuschließen. Die Schattenberichterstatterin ist heute da, Linda McEwan, die den Hut fürs Parlament aufhat, die dieses Dossier hier durchs Parlament schiffen wird, und selbstverständlich die Schattenberichterstatter. Und ich möchte gleich schon als allererstes dann dem irischen Gesundheitsminister das Wort erteilen, dass wir keine Zeit verlieren und dass wir gleich in die Debatte einsteigen. Ich möchte alle bitten, und damit meine ich auch alle, dass wir uns an die Zeiten halten, dass es die Möglichkeit gibt, für die Kolleginnen und Kollegen hier im Umweltausschuss auch Fragen zu stellen und dass diese dann auch beantwortet werden. Insofern hat der Minister jetzt 10 Minuten, um einzuführen in das Thema. Bitte, Herr Minister. It's your turn.
Cahiрлach matches good done kind renew in Quinny Show. I'd like to thank the Chair, Matthew Scrooge, for the invitation to speak at this hearing and for the opportunity to speak about our efforts in Ireland and Europe to deal with tobacco and the damage caused by smoking. It's important to take a moment to consider the immense damage that smoking causes and the economic burden it places on Europe. Approximately 700,000 Europeans die every single year of tobacco-related causes. Smoking is the largest avoidable health risk in Europe, causing more problems than alcohol, drug abuse and obesity. EU public health care expenditure on treating smoking attributable diseases is estimated at €25.3 billion annually. and €8.3 billion is lost annually in productivity from deaths, absenteeism and early retirement linked to smoking. And that's before you count the cost of the human misery that this habit causes right across all our people. We're all aware that half of all long-term smokers will die from smoking-related illnesses. And what does this equate to statistically? The World Health Organization has reported that tobacco caused 100 million deaths in the 20th century. If the current trends continue, it will cause up to 1 billion deaths in the 21st century. We cannot allow this to continue. A Eurobarometer survey shows that 28% of the EU population smoke. The overall prevalence rates for Ireland are more or less similar to the EU average, with 29% of Irish adults being current smokers. This is simply not acceptable. Nicotine is an immensely addictive substance, and once our children and young people become addicted, they are trapped by this addiction, with recent studies showing that 70% of smokers in Europe began smoking before the age of 18. We must act now to make something less attractive, or smoking less attractive to our young people. Indeed, in a survey in Ireland, there was 78% of smokers surveyed said they'd started smoking before the age of 18, when they were minors. So what are we doing to alleviate the societal and economic burden placed on us by smoking? What can we do to discourage people from smoking? I have been very public since my appointment as Minister for Health in Ireland about my commitment to tackle the problem of smoking. Indeed, I have indicated that the Tobacco Products Directive is my key priority during the Irish presidency. No one measure alone can reduce the number of smokers or the number of our children who start to smoke. A combination of measures is required. This includes effective legislation, comprehensive support for smokers who are trying to quit, and sustained media and education campaigns on the harmful effects of smoking. All these measures have the effect of denormalising tobacco use in our society, which, in my view, is the most successful way to prevent future generations from continuing the habit. The proposed revision of the Tobacco Directive is a key tool in preventing our young people from starting to smoke. As Commissioner Borg has stated previously, the ambition of the proposal is to make tobacco products and smoking less attractive and thus discourage initiation among young people. The proposal aims to achieve this by placing stricter rules on features that increase the attractiveness of tobacco products, for example, ban on characterising flavours and flavourings. It also proposes to increase the size of the health warnings on the tobacco product packs. As you are aware, the proposal will address labelling and packaging, ingredients, regulation of nicotine-containing products, illicit trade, tracking and tracing system, and security features. My objective during the Irish presidency is to build consensus and to facilitate agreement among Member States on the proposal so that negotiations can commence with Parliament as soon as possible. As stated earlier, I am personally committed to tackling the problem of smoking, and I'd like to take a moment to discuss Ireland's achievements to date in moving towards a tobacco-free society. Indeed, I feel the word achievement should be substituted for the word progress. A comprehensive range of tobacco control legislation is in place in Ireland, which places us in the top rank of countries internationally. Some of these significant initiatives include the successful implementation of the Smoke-Free Initiative in 2004, the ban on the sale of packets of cigarettes of less than 20 in 2007, groundbreaking legislation in 2009 that introduced a ban on in-store display and advertising and the introduction of a retail register, a prohibition on self-service vending machines except in licensed premises or in registered clubs, a ban on sale of tobacco products to individuals under the age of 18 years, cigarette price increases aimed at reducing smoking prevalence and preventing children and adolescents from taking up the habit, the introduction of graphic warnings on cigarette packs as and from the beginning of this month. Specifically, I believe that the ban on the sale of packs of cigarettes of less than 20, removing the point of sale display and advertising, and the introduction of graphic warnings will have a significant positive impact on our young people in the longer term. Indeed, it is heartening to see that in a recent survey, the number of Irish children who smoke and who were aged between 10 and 17 years of age fell from 18% to 12% from 2002 to 2010. However, this figure is still far too high. The introduction of many successful tobacco control measures in Ireland has been facilitated by developments here at European Union level. It's important that our tobacco policy and legislation framework continues to develop within the context of the European Union. Further measures being considered in Ireland include a ban on smoking in cars with children present, and the extension of the smoking ban to other public areas such as playgrounds, public parks, sports grounds, educational and health campuses. What we are trying to achieve is to denormalise smoking. We will have an opportunity to review progress by all Member States regarding smoke-free environments and tobacco control measures during the Health Informal in Dublin next month. And I do hope that as many of you as can come will be there. I look forward to hearing your opinions today and to working constructively with you, Rapporteur Linda McAvan, and the Shadow Rapporteurs on reaching agreement on this important directive. I have discussed the directive with Commissioner Borg, and I am aware of his personal commitment to ensuring this directive is adopted as quickly as possible. And we do need to adopt it as quickly as possible, because with every year another 700,000 of our citizens are going to die. Our legislative and policy framework must continuously be developed to meet the new and ever-evolving challenges presented to us, and I believe that the current proposal will prove to be crucial in the battle against tobacco-related illnesses in Europe. Ladies and gentlemen of the Parliament, this is about saving lives, it's about protecting our citizens, and it's about shielding our children from this killer habit. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Minister. Wir kommen dann zum Gesundheitskommissar und jetzt hat für 10 Minuten Herr Borsch das Wort. Bitte, wir sind gespannt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Minister Riley, honourable members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss in a public hearing the revised Tobacco Products Directive. And I know that the European Parliament has been in the forefront since 2009, requesting the Commission to strengthen the EU law on tobacco products for the benefit of European citizens. This is not regulating just for the sake of regulating. This is doing something, as Mr. Riley has said, to reduce the number of smokers in the European Union, which would mean saving lives in the first place. You all know that 700,000 people die prematurely in the European Union alone as a result of smoke-related diseases. Then if there are economic advantages which will ensue from that, much the better. But the main aim remains that of saving people's lives and ensure better, healthier living. And particularly last autumn, the Parliament strongly urged the Commission to act swiftly on this proposal. This is what I did, Mr. Chairman. At my hearing, I promised last November to deliver by the end of January, and I managed, with the support of President Barroso and my fellow commissioners, to deliver on the 19th of December. That is 6 weeks earlier than I had imagined. Now, the current directive is already 11 years old, so it was time to bring it in line with today's realities and today's scientific and international developments. New tobacco products have appeared on the market which look like lipstick. I have here something which doesn't look like tobacco. It looks like a perfume or a lipstick, and even the colors which are used and the way they are marketed. And then tobacco should not only look like tobacco, it should taste like tobacco as well, not like vanilla or smell like sweets. And why are we saying that it should look like tobacco and taste like tobacco? Because, as Minister Riley said, these products are also produced in this way to be attractive to the young. And we know that no one starts smoking at 50, or very rarely does someone start smoking at 50. Usually it is below the age of 25, and the majority when they are still minors. And we have also seen the development of new products like electronic cigarettes. So we had to act, and we are acting through this directive. In the meantime, the European Union as a whole, but also the individual member states, signed and ratified the World Health Organization's Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. And this means, Mr. Chairman, that we have a legal obligation to comply with its provisions, which cover labelling, flavours, and the fight against illicit trade. So we must bring EU law in line with our international commitments as well. Now, as I said, the Commission's proposal focuses strongly on young people. And I believe regulators have the responsibility to protect and discourage children and young people from taking up smoking, if our intention is to reduce the number of smokers in the European Union by 2% over the next 5 years, that is 1.2 million smokers less. We have to do two things. One, persuade young people not to start smoking, and secondly, persuade those who already smoke to quit smoking. And young people start smoking because they think it is cool, and they think that, after all, you can stop at any time you want. And many of us, and I know that there are some of us even on this table, who are ex-smokers here, know what I am talking about. Then people continue to smoke because they become addicted. We sometimes ignore the addictive nature of tobacco, and therefore they do not manage to quit. Then 20, 30, 40 years down the line, smoking translates itself into cancer, heart attacks, and so many other health problems. This is the reality for the 700,000 people who die prematurely every year because of smoke-related diseases. This is like wiping out every year the population of an entire city like Frankfurt or Palermo. And this is why we need to regulate tobacco products in a way that reflects what these products do to people's health. If you look at a pink package with cute elephants on it, like this product which is on the market, and the product tastes or smells like fruit, we even have pina colada cigarettes as well, will you be able to judge that you are buying a harmful, addictive product? This is the point. Tobacco products should look and taste like tobacco products, and they should not be masked by fancy designs or disguised by flavours. They should not be deceptive. And that is what the Commission proposal is all about. So first, the proposal seeks to ensure that tobacco products contain adequate information about their impact on health so that people can make informed choices. This could be or could look like a shocking picture, but it is important to introduce shocking pictorial warnings, as some of the member states, I believe 13 member states, have already done so. Today it is discretionary. After this proposal comes into force, with the approval of Parliament and the Council, it will become mandatory. So 75% of the cover of this tobacco product, 75% will have to show warnings, pictorial and otherwise. We also propose that there are no promotional elements on tobacco products and no attractive lipstick-shaped packages. My aim is that when people look at a tobacco product, they get a very clear message that this product will damage their health. Then it is up to each and every person to decide whether or not to consume the product. We are not prohibiting smoking inside the European Union, but we are making the smokers or those who are tempted to smoke know what they are doing. And around 30% of the package would still remain for trademarks, and the proposal, however, enables member states to put in place, if they want to, on a discretionary basis, plain packaging, which, as you know, is not plain at all. It's a packet full of warnings, and all the trade names are written in the same way. Now, turning to ingredients, we propose that tobacco products with a characterizing flavour, for example, a strong aroma like vanilla or menthol, should not be allowed. So it's not all flavours or additives which will be prohibited, but the characterizing flavours, as these are particularly attractive for young people and make it easier to start smoking. Potentially misleading additives such as caffeine or vitamins should not be allowed in tobacco products either. The proposal does not regulate additives necessary to manufacture tobacco products, such as sugar needed to make barley or oriental tobacco palatable. As such, the proposal does not discriminate between tobacco varieties. In addition, we propose that any product which increases toxicity or addictiveness is not allowed on the market. More work is needed in this area, and we are closely following discussions on toxicity and addictiveness in the World Health Organization. Some other issues, Mr. Chairman, with your indulgence. First, we propose to maintain the ban on snus. And I would like to remind the Members of Parliament that when Sweden acceded to the European Union, it was given a concession to allow snus inside Sweden on the condition that it is not marketed in the European Union. So there was a quid pro quo. The concession was only allowed under the condition that it is not marketed in the European Union. And the ban was in place before Sweden entered the European Union. It was in place for over 20 years. It was confirmed by Parliament and the Council in 2001, and it was further confirmed by a judgment of the European Court of Justice in 2004. Snus is addictive, has adverse health effects, is increasingly sold in Sweden in packages and flavours targeting young people, and has great market growth potential. So these are the attractive packaging or presentation of snus, even with such enticing names as radical red. I don't think it has a political connotation. It's just that it sounds cooler to describe something as radical red. And there is no compelling evidence either that snus helps people to quit smoking. In Canada, the number of smokers has gone down to 19%, in California 12%, and the United States 20% without the use of snus. Second, for electronic cigarettes, our proposal foresees that products above a certain nicotine threshold should require market authorization under pharmaceutical legislation, as is currently the case in about half of the member states. Below that nicotine threshold, it would be enough to have a health warning. And this approach removes the differential treatment of electronic cigarettes and nicotine replacement therapies. We propose reinforced labelling and ingredient rules. And finally, the proposal foresees measures against illicit products, including a tracking system and a security system within the tobacco product itself. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, we are not interfering with people's choices. Rather, we aim to protect the vulnerable, the children and young people, an objective fully in line with the legal basis of the proposal. And with that comment, I would augur a smooth and swift adoption of this important piece of legislation during the current parliamentary mandate. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kommissar. Ich möchte dann den Reigen eröffnen. Als allererstes sprechen die Koordinatoren oder die Berichterstatter und Schattenberichterstatter. Spricht Linda, ich muss es auf 2 Minuten begrenzen, weil wir haben sonst nicht die Möglichkeit, dass die anderen Kollegen alle drankommen. Für 2 Minuten, ich weiß, das ist ungerecht, dafür werde ich geteert und gefedert, aber es geht nicht anders. 2 Minuten. Linda McEwan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Commissioner and to the Minister for coming here today. Well, my main aim here today is to listen to the speakers and to listen to colleagues who take the floor. So I'm going to be very brief at this stage and say that I welcome the fact we have this directive on the table. All the coordinators from all the political groups worked very hard to make sure we got this directive in time to be dealt with in this Parliament. And both the Minister and the Commissioner have said why it's such an important directive. Because I don't think even the most hardened smokers want to see more young people smoking. All the surveys show that smokers do not want their children to start smoking. And the aim of this directive is to stop that happening, to recruit fewer and fewer smokers. And so, for me, the measures which are proposed in the directive are good ones, and I'll be seeking to strengthen them from the public health perspective. There'll be many issues we'll have to discuss. There's some new issues we have to discuss. The role of e-cigarettes, I know, is controversial. Different trends in different member states. I know there'll be discussion on the issues of packaging and flavourings, and we'll be taking evidence from different countries where different measures have been proposed. But I look very much forward to this debate. I remind all members here that we do have the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, mentioned by both the Minister and by our Commissioner. I, as rapporteur, we're working within the context of that convention, and therefore will be limiting my contact with business to the way the convention suggests, which is to have public meetings with the industry, which will be minuted and recorded, and remind all MEPs that you too are bound by the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. And you too, if you meet the tobacco industry and the upstream and downstream users, should also be meeting in a public way, recording those meetings and making sure you're transparent about who you meet. So I look forward to the debate over the next few months and to listen to colleagues, and as I said, to seeing this as a very important measure to promote public health in Europe.
Vielen Dank an die Berichterstatterin. Karl-Heinz Florenz, bitte.
Ja, ich versuche es ganz kurz zu machen. Ich interessiere mich, Herr Kommissar und Herr Ratspräsident, seit vielen Jahren für die Chemikalien, die in die Zigaretten eingemischt werden. Da gibt es ja Gerüchte, dass das bis zu 700 Stück sein dürfen. Und Sie begrenzen die Chemikalien auf die charakteristischen Aromen. Warum hat die Kommission nicht diejenigen Chemikalien schlicht verboten, von denen die wissen, dass sie hochgefährlich und toxisch sind?
Vielen Dank. Als nächstes spricht dann Frédéric Ries.
Oui, merci Monsieur le Président. Je voudrais me joindre aux propos de notre rapporteure, Madame McAvan, et remercier son engagement, son écoute et ses vertus déjà avérées de collaboration. Je crois que c'est dans cet esprit effectivement que nous allons travailler avec l'ensemble des collègues rapporteurs et l'ensemble des collègues sur cette directive. Je voudrais remercier aussi les propos liminaires ici du ministre et du commissaire dont on connaît l'engagement, le ministre Riley. Nous avons beaucoup travaillé avec le commissaire Byrne sur les mêmes questions il y a une dizaine d'années et je reconnais bien ici l'engagement et le volontarisme irlandais en la matière, quoique dans vos best practices, dans vos exemples, notamment concernant les espaces publics, vous avez touché aux sacro-saintes questions de subsidiarité, qui ne sont pas concernées ici et dont on sait qu'elles sont parfois très difficiles lorsqu'elles sont soumises à une approbation du Parlement européen. On s'y heurte parfois. Le commissaire Borg a l'habitude de rappeler, je ne suis pas sûre qu'il l'ait fait aujourd'hui, mais il l'a fait dans l'audition précédente, que si le tabac devait être introduit sur le marché aujourd'hui, il serait interdit. Alors, je m'amuse un peu, entre guillemets, d'entendre certaines des dispositions veillant, par exemple, à interdire les produits qui augmenteraient la toxicité d'un produit de base qu'il est déjà. Si on pousse votre raisonnement jusqu'au bout, effectivement, on devrait être tout à fait radical. Alors bon, je ne suis pas en train d'être aussi radical que certains de vos propos, mais effectivement, on peut parfois s'étonner quand en Europe aujourd'hui on est en train de chasser le moindre gramme de viande de cheval et qu'on entend ici sur ce débat-là que de risk assessment, on est toujours en train de se demander si effectivement on peut continuer à tuer. Bon, voilà, c'était ce que je voulais dire et pour vous dire effectivement que nous allons nous montrer particulièrement attentifs à toutes les mesures qui sont proposées ici. On ne va pas rentrer là tout de suite dans la technicité de toutes ces mesures. Moi j'avais peut-être deux questions à poser, peut-être une à M. Riley, mais de politique plus générale ici, de stratégie. Monsieur le ministre, est-ce que vous vous attendez, est-ce que vous avez déjà, je l'imagine, été l'objet de très fortes réticences de la part de certains des États membres sur base de la proposition telle qu'elle est proposée par la Commission? On a tous lu l'avis notamment de la Pologne, qui devrait être du suivi de certains autres, parce que le Parlement européen, dans le triangle institutionnel, est une chose, nous avons les États membres, et donc je voudrais savoir si vous pouvez déjà faire un état des lieux de la question, si vous pouvez déjà le faire, et peut-être vous demander, peut-être parallèlement à ceci, on a cité toute une série de chiffres. Je conclus, Monsieur le Président. Nous avons tous les chiffres. Ils sont tous catastrophiques. en matière d'efficacité de nos législations. Elles datent d'il y a 10 ans, donc elles doivent être accompagnées. La meilleure loi du monde ne faire que ce qu'elle peut. Il faut des campagnes, et je pense que c'est ce qui nous différencie du Canada, de la Nouvelle-Zélande, de l'Australie. Quid de campagnes de promotion pour toucher les vulnérables, les femmes, les jeunes.
Vielen Dank. Als nächstes spricht für 2 Minuten Karl Schlüter, der ist der Schattenberichterstatter der Grünen. Bitte, Karl.
Thank you, and thank you, Commissioner. I mean, you have come a good way in your proposal, even if we would still ask for plain packaging to be mandatory. And I think the trademark argument is really weak. I mean, what value does a trademark have that murders millions of people all over the globe? So take it away from the package and we don't see it anymore. It's the best option anyway. And then also on additives, it's good. No characterizing flavors. I would be even happier if you got rid of them. Why should we add any flavors to tobacco? We shouldn't help them sell more cigarettes. Let's talk about how we can minimize that. And then also, of course, coming from Sweden, the snus issue. For those who are not Swedish, you won't understand why it's so important, but it was one of the conditions we had when we joined. However, I'm one of the few Swedes who do not want to export this product all over Europe. I think we shouldn't spread bad habits. Nicotine in any form is bad, and therefore I also want to have a regulation on e-cigarettes and not let the market completely loose, because nicotine is extremely heavy drug regarding dependency. It's very, very strongly dependent. It makes you dependent. So I think any kind of nicotine must be regulated in a strict way. And then finally, on the packaging, I'm happy that you want to ban small packages, slim cigarettes, and all those kind of marketing toys and gimmick. And then the last thing I would really like to get rid of is the point of sale advertising that is still around Europe very prevalent. So if we could get rid of that, we might help some hundred thousands of people not to start smoking. And if we have, like in Australia, mandatory toll-free quit smoke line numbers on the packages and so on, we might help some people actually to stop smoking also. And I think that's really beneficial to Europe's health and economy. To smoke is bad for your health, but also for your neighbor's health and for your baby's health and for your friend's health and your colleague's health, and it's bad for the economy. So every single smoker we can help stop is a good investment.
Vielen Dank. Dann Anna Rosbach als Koordinatorin der ECR. Bitte.
Danke, Vorsitzende. Ich werde es auf Danish machen. Så nu har alle indtil nu været politisk meget korrekte, især når jeg lige lytter til kollega Karl Schlüter. Så jeg vil have lov til at lege djævelens advokat. Som 18-årig har man lov til at køre bil, man må gifte sig, og man må bestemme, hvem der skal lede ens land. Altså stemme ved et valg. Men man må ikke selv beslutte, om man vil ryge eller ej. Ja, jeg ved ikke. Har Irland råd til at give afkald på den indtægt, der kommer fra salg af cigaretter? Jeg tror, at mit land vil få sine problemer. Det er en stor del af vores skatteindtægt. Så jeg ved ikke. Kan vi ikke holde op med at være dobbeltmoralske her i dag? Jeg synes, det vil være noget så befriende. For på den ene side skal alle beskyttes mod rygning, og på den anden side, så har nationalstaterne altså brug for de der penge. Så jo, ja selvfølgelig, når det her er sagt, og nu har jeg lejet djævelens advokat, så er jeg naturligvis enig i, at befolkningerne skal vide, hvad det er, de gør, når de ryger. Og at indpakningerne tydeligt skal vise, at det er et nikotinsk produkt, de sidder med i hånden. Det behøver jeg nok ikke at sige, at jeg er uenig i, for selvfølgelig er jeg det ikke det. Men jeg ser hellere, at vi arbejder med folkeoplysning i stedet for forbud. For det er altså, det må I have mig undskyld, underligt, at vi tillader voksne, eller vi ikke tillader voksne mennesker selv at bestemme, om de vil ryge e-cigaretter, tage snus, eller have cigaretter i den ene eller i den anden størrelse. Vi ved som sagt alle sammen, hvor usundt det er, men er det virkelig EU's opgave at lave forbud mod et produkt? Hvad er det næste, vi forbyder? Jamen, er det så piller, eller alkohol, eller så videre, og så videre? Så jeg tror, vi skal passe lidt på med, hvor vi er på vej hen. Tak, formand.
Als nächstes spricht der Kollege Rossi. 2 Minuten, bitte.
Sì, grazie Presidente. Ma innanzitutto, caro Commissario, io chiedo anche a lei Presidente, se sia normale che sul documento ufficiale della Commissione ci sia solamente un'immagine di divieto di fumo. Non lo so se sia legittimo, visto che dovremmo sentire tutte le parti e tutti gli interessi, occuparci solo di una su un documento ufficiale della Commissione. Io lo ritengo lesivo delle libertà e dei diritti non solo dei colleghi ma anche delle persone che sono state invitate qua. Prima cosa. Seconda cosa, io non ho mai fumato, non fumo, ma credo che non si possa nemmeno vietare alla gente di eventualmente fumare se lo vuole fare. Per questo io condivido l'intervento della collega Rosbach, anche perché la mia paura è che quando si impongono troppi limiti e si fanno coercizioni nei confronti di una categoria di persone, parliamo di decine di milioni di europei, il rischio è che si vada a spingere il contrabbando di sigarette, quindi il fumo illegale, quindi sigarette con dentro di tutto, perché chi controlla cosa c'è in quelle sigarette, guardate caso, al 99% di provenienza cinese? Chi controlla che additivi ci sono lì dentro? Chi controlla gli antiparassitari che hanno usato per produrre quel tabacco? Io lo vorrei sapere da lei, commissario, visto che già oggi circa il 16% delle sigarette in Europa sono di provenienza illegale. Chi le controlla? Chi garantisce la qualità di quelle sigarette? Dopodiché, invece, se si tratta di campagne di informazione, specie ai giovani, a tutti, il fumo fa male, sono d'accordissimo, ripeto, non ho mai fumato, questo sì, informare, ma vietare e limitare le libertà personali, io non ritengo sia compito dell'Unione Europea, se no lo dovremmo fare con l'alcol, con tutte le bevande alcoliche in qualche modo additivate, lo dovremmo fare con le droghe, mentre invece moltissimi colleghi le vogliono addirittura liberalizzare, ma allora diamoci una direzione uguale per tutti, non possiamo fare e cambiare ogni volta le cose.
Vielen Dank. Für die GUR spricht dann Frau Andersen. Sie ist die Schattenberichterstatterin. Bitte, für 2 Minuten.
Without doubt, there's no other consumer product legally available on the market which kills when used exactly as the manufacturer intends it to be used. And I was quite pleased to hear what Minister Riley said about the Tobacco Product Directive being your top priority during the Irish presidency. And Minister, to that end, I would ask you for the remainder of the presidency what initiatives you have in place to drive that forward, because obviously as Shadow Rapporteur I would be very keen to be following those. And as Shadow Rapporteur, obviously I want to associate myself with the Rapporteur's comments about being bound very much by the Framework Convention, and I will be honouring that in the way that was outlined earlier. And I would like to see the Tobacco Product Directive strengthened in line with the public health perspective. And therefore I would concur with comments that was made earlier with regards to the need for plain packaging being mandatory. I would like to ask the Commissioner, because I have a concern with regards to a possible dead hand being put on this as we try to move it through this mandate. I intend, and I know other rapporteurs intend, to ensure that that doesn't happen and that we get it through this mandate before the end of the session. But in the event of some obstacles being put in our way, I would like to ask you for some comment with regards to the ramification of that, if that was extended in, unfortunately, to 2014. But I want to make the point very, very clearly that I, as Shadow Rapporteur, do not intend to allow that to happen and to use whatever power I can to prevent that from happening.
Vielen Dank. Wir haben jetzt so viele Kolleginnen und Kollegen auf der Liste. Ich lese einmal vor. Und das ist Koumoutsakos, Peter Liese, François Grostet, Scotta, dann McGuinness, dann Gebrandi, Wilmot, Zanoni, Westlund, Florenz, hatten wir schon, Fjellner, Thun und Hohnstein, dann Klaas, Franco und Ayuso. Habe ich jemanden vergessen? Rebecca Harms. Gut, und dann würde ich bitten, dass jeder eine Minute eine Frage stellt, sonst kommen wir nicht durch und wir haben auch keine Zeit mehr dann für die Beantwortung der Fragen. Bitte eine Minute. Ja, als erstes erhält das Wort Herr Koumoutsakos. Wo ist er? Ah, da. Okay.
Ευχαριστώ κύριε Πρόεδρε, ευχαριστώ κύριε Επίτροπε και κύριε Υπουργέ για την πολύ ενημερωτική συζήτηση που ξεκινήσατε. Η πρόκληση της οδηγίας που συζητάμε είναι να βρούμε μια ισορροπία μεταξύ της βελτίωσης της λειτουργίας της εσωτερικής αγοράς και της προστασίας της δημόσιας υγείας. Δηλαδή, να προστατεύσουμε τη δημόσια υγεία ως θεμελιώδη υποχρέωσή μας και ταυτόχρονα να προστατεύσουμε την ομαλή λειτουργία της αγοράς και του ανταγωνισμού, που είναι επίσης θεμελιώδης αρχή της ενιαίας αγοράς, άρα και δική μας αρχή. Πρέπει λοιπόν να αποφύγουμε μια συζήτηση με όρους θρησκευτικού φανατισμού, για να πετύχουμε ένα καλό νομοθετικό κείμενο. Ακούστηκαν ήδη ορισμένοι προβληματισμοί, εγώ θα ήθελα να μείνω λιγάκι σε μια συγκεκριμένη κατηγορία που αφορά, σε μια συγκεκριμένη ρύθμιση που αφορά τα τσιγάρα διαμέτρου μικρότερες από 7,5 mm, τα slim. Αν πρόθεση της οδηγίας είναι να αποτρέψουμε νέους να μπουν στο κάπνισμα και έχουμε μάλιστα εξαιρέσει μια αλφα κατηγορία, αναρωτιέμαι γιατί δεν εξαιρούμε αυτά τα τσιγάρα. Εγώ δεν έχω δει ποτέ μικρά παιδιά να καπνίζουν slim και εν πάση περιπτώσει με το να αποτρέψουμε τα slim από κάποιον ήδη καπνιστή δεν θα τον ρίξουμε στα τσιγάρα. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ.
Frau Grostet, bitte, für eine Minute. Frau Grostet, une minute, s'il vous plaît.
Excusez-moi, mais l'interprète n'avait pas donné mon nom, donc je n'avais pas entendu. Alors, je vais être très très rapide. Deux questions sur la cigarette électronique, qui devient un produit d'initiation aux véritables cigarettes, d'ailleurs qui sont rachetées d'ailleurs par les grands industriels du tabac. Vous fixez un seuil de concentration en nicotine, mais ce seuil est largement dépassé par ces cigarettes électroniques. Alors je voudrais avoir un avis du panel sur cette question-là. Deuxième question, concernant les arômes. On crée des arômes pour inciter les jeunes à fumer. Là, il semblerait que le menthol ne soit pas une arôme qui soit intéressante pour les jeunes. Qu'en est-il? Est-ce qu'il y a des données scientifiques sur cette question-là? Est-ce que l'on pourrait maintenir quand même les cigarettes au menthol sous prétexte qu'elles ne sont pas très séduisantes pour les jeunes?
Peter Liese, eine Minute.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender, Herr Kommissar, Herr Minister. Vielen Dank für Ihre Ausführungen. Sie sind ja beide in der EVP und beide haben sich klar für den Gesundheitsschutz ausgesprochen. Vielen Dank. Auch ich persönlich unterstütze die Kernelemente des Kommissionsvorschlages, aber es ist auch gut, dass wir viel Zeit haben, alles zu diskutieren. Zwei Fragen. Wären Sie bereit, den Vorschlag dahingehend zu präzisieren, dass wir sehr viel stärker auf die Gefahren des Passivrauchens noch hinweisen und auf die Gefahren insbesondere für Kinder? Denn während ich schon glaube, dass fast jeder weiß, dass Rauchen für ihn selbst schädlich ist, sind die Gefahren insbesondere für Kinder vielleicht noch nicht allen bekannt. Und im Moment ist das ja nur in der Komitologie vorgesehen, aber könnten wir vielleicht im Mitentscheidungsverfahren da auch einen speziellen Warnhinweis noch ausarbeiten. Und die zweite Frage schließt sich an das an, was Françoise Grostet gesagt hat, die E-Zigaretten. Ich höre von vielen Bürgerinnen und Bürgern, dass sie die E-Zigarette benutzen, damit sie nicht die normale Zigarette benutzen. Und ist das nicht insofern eine Art Harm Reduction, eine Reduzierung der Gefahr, und könnte man das nicht vielleicht in dem Sinne betrachten?
Vielen Dank, Herr Skotta, für eine Minute. Herr Skotta, für eine Minute bitte.
Signor Commissario, onorevoli colleghi, pur concordando con l'intento finale della proposta, quello di rendere il consumatore più conscio degli effetti del fumo sulla propria salute, credo sia indispensabile non dimenticare le molteplici realtà economiche che ruotano attorno a questo settore. A livello europeo si parla spesso e volentieri del sostegno delle piccole e medie imprese per il mantenimento dei posti di lavoro contro la contraffazione dei nostri prodotti europei, eccetera. L'obiettivo di diminuire i fumatori nella comunità europea non deve far diminuire anche i posti di lavoro. Il famigerato pacchetto generico, ad esempio, sarà più facile da imitare e rischierà di alimentare il commercio di prodotti contraffatti con conseguenze pesanti non solo sui produttori e i rivenditori ma anche sul gettito fiscale dello stesso Stato membro. Urge quindi una revisione di questa proposta perché togliere lavoro a chi ha scelto di operare nella legalità e aumentare i rischi per la salute di chi fumerà tabacco non conforme agli standard comunitari, scegliendo sigarette di contrabbando, non credo rientri nelle priorità della comunitaria.
Vielen Dank. Frau Mercedes für eine Minute.
Thank you, Chairman, and my thanks to the Commission and the Presidency for their intervention. I think it would be quite alarming if we decided, based on the comments of my friend Mr Rossi and others, to stop shielding our children from this killer habit because of our concerns about the economic consequences of job losses in the tobacco sector. But I do see how wide this debate is. We know that cigarettes kill. We want, I think, those of us that have children, that they will not start smoking, and it's our duty to legislate for that. We do need to look at the illicit trade, but let's not say we cannot take action to prevent people starting to smoke because of our concerns about the illicit trade. We need action on both fronts, and therefore I am concerned, and I think Mrs McAvan was correct to talk about the lobbying activities of those who want to see smoking continue. Let's heed her warning. Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Herr Brandi.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for making your proposal. I'm a strong supporter of very stringent policy towards smoking. I think it reflects very well also the changes in societal attitude towards smoking. My question, though, is extremely concrete. Do you believe that, on the one hand, the European Commission can propose very stringent measures against smoking, and on the other hand, keep supporting the subsidies to the production of tobacco? I think those two are very difficult to defend from one college of commissioners, so maybe you can reflect on that as well. Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Glenis Wilmot.
Thanks very much. I welcome the proposals, but for my mind they don't go far enough. I'd like to see standardised packaging, and I think as far as the branding is concerned, it's the last place that tobacco producers can advertise their wares that kill 1 in 2 of users. So I don't think we should worry about that, and I think we should have plain packaging as they have done in Australia. I welcome the fact that flavourings like vanilla are going to be banned, but what about things that make burley tobacco palatable? I think we should ban them also. If tobacco isn't very nice to taste, it isn't very nice to taste, and that should be an end to it. And I also think it's outrageous that the same College of Commissioners subsidise tobacco on the one hand when we're trying to deal with it as a public health issue on the other. And finally, people at work have a right to work in a smoke-free atmosphere, and it isn't the Commission's problem, but it is the Parliament's problem that we still have members in this House who subject workers to smoke in the members' bar in Brussels and in Strasbourg, and it is a disgrace.
Andrea Zanoni.
Grazie Presidente, grazie al Ministro e al Commissario. A mio avviso la proposta della Commissione è una proposta molto interessante che va nel verso giusto. 700.000 persone ogni anno che perdono la vita sono moltissime. Condivido il fatto che bisogna operare per salvare i nostri bambini, ma credo che bisogna operare anche per salvare tutti i cittadini dell'Unione Europea, quelli che fumano direttamente, ma soprattutto anche quelli che involontariamente fumano grazie al fumo passivo. Io credo che dovremmo fare delle grosse campagne di informazione via internet, TV e nelle scuole, perché bisogna fare informazione utile a delle scelte poi consapevoli. Volevo appunto chiedere che cosa ne pensate per quanto riguarda questa campagna di informazione importantissima e sul fumo passivo. Credo che dovremmo comunque fare molto di più di quello che viene proposto con questa proposta. Grazie.
Vielen Dank. Åsa Westlund.
Tack så mycket, herr ordförande, på svenska. Min fråga är helt enkelt varför EU-kommissionen inte respekterar det svenska undantag som du själv redogjorde för. Genom att förbjuda eller föreslå att förbjuda smaktillsatser också i snus så förbjuder ni ju bakvägen en stor del av det som är svenskt snus och därmed respekterar ni inte undantaget. Så varför gör ni inte det? Sen påstår du också att smaktillsatser i snus används för att locka nya användare. Men du belade inte det med någon fakta. Jag skulle gärna vilja veta vad den faktan är. För den faktan jag har tyder på någonting helt annat. Så jag vill gärna veta varifrån du har fått den faktan. Tack.
Vielen Dank. Christopher Fjellner.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to second exactly what Åsa Westlund just said. But okay, you want to keep the ban on snus. It's not carrots. It's not good for you. The best thing is not to use tobacco at all. But it is the least harmful tobacco product. And accidentally the only one banned. And that is undisputed. The Royal College of Physicians noted that it was between 100 and 1,000 times less harmful than smoking. Imagine the reaction if we would have banned French red wine but allowed vodka. Especially as here in Brussels, I'm able to buy traditional Moroccan tobacco, bizarrely alike snus, called makla. It's produced in Belgium. And that is not being understood in Sweden. You had the opportunity to regulate all smokeless tobacco, the same, tough. But you missed that, and I would like to know how and why. You look to California, New Zealand, and Canada. Good, but you could look closer to home. If you look at Sweden and Norway, you would see it has the best statistics in the world when it comes to reducing tobacco-related harm. And it actually allowed for choice. It didn't ban snus.
Vielen Dank. Frau Thun und Hochstand, bitte.
Dziękuję bardzo. Jasne, że konieczna jest jakaś aktywność w kierunku ratowania zdrowia Europejczyków oraz bronienia młodych Europejczyków, żeby nie popadali w nałogi. Ale co mam mówić w Krakowie setkom ludzi, którzy już teraz przychodzą do mnie i mówią, że wtrącamy się im w ich życie prywatne, że oni palą tylko na balkonie i w ogóle nikogo nie trują, a właściwie to jak zakazujemy typ mentolu, wanilii i tak dalej, to niedługo zakażemy białego cukru, zakażemy kawy, zakażemy alkoholu, zakażemy białej mąki i tak dalej. Czy zamiast zakazów nie powinniśmy się bardziej skupić na edukacji?
Vielen Dank. Frau Klaas.
Ja, danke schön. Genau da darf ich anschließen. Jugend bewahren, Herr Kommissar, das heißt aufklären, bilden und dann selbst entscheiden lassen. Jugend will selbst entscheiden und wir wissen aus der Erfahrung, alles was verboten ist, ist erst recht interessant und Ihr Beispiel vom Snus mit Radical Red zeigt eigentlich, dass Abschreckung auch anziehend wirkt. Ich finde, die Krankheitsbilder, sie diskriminieren die Menschen, die diese Krankheiten in der Tat haben. Wie will man die Austauschbarkeit von Zigaretten, Europa und Nicht-Europa, verhindern, wenn alle Zigaretten gleich aussehen? Auch das ist eine Frage, die wir gerne beantwortet hätten. Und zum anderen 1,5 Millionen Arbeitsplätze, Millionen an Steuern. Ist das dann alles schmutziges Geld? Tabak ist letztendlich ein legales Produkt.
Vielen Dank. Als nächstes spricht Herr Franco. Eine Minute, bitte.
Oui, merci, merci Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Ministre. Monsieur le Commissaire, juste quelques mots. Certains collègues ont pris des positions très abruptes, d'autres un peu plus mesurées. Ce sera le sens de mon intervention. Je l'ai déjà dit en commission, ne pas être excessif. Il est évident qu'aujourd'hui, le tabac est monté du doigt, souvent avec raison, l'alcool, la viande, le lait de vache. Il ne faut plus rien consommer en Europe. En tout cas, en ce qui concerne le tabac, je pense que lutter contre le tabagisme des jeunes, oui, résolument, est une priorité, mais pour le reste, après une information de nos concitoyens, laissons-les faire un petit peu, en fin de compte, ce qu'ils veulent. Les mêmes qui sont en train de vouloir à tout prix interdire la consommation du tabac nous demandent la légalisation du cannabis. Donc, je crois que, par exemple, ma collègue le disait tout à l'heure, au niveau du menthol, je crois que nous manquons d'éléments scientifiques objectifs et je comprends la position de nos collègues polonais. Donc personnellement, je serai beaucoup plus mesuré.
Vielen Dank, Frau Ayuso.
Muchas gracias, presidente.
efectivamente el tabaco es malo para la salud, pero es bueno para las arcas públicas. Y a las arcas públicas el fraude le cuesta, según la OLAC, 10.000 millones de euros en el 2010, con tendencia a aumentar. Creo que el artículo 14 de esta directiva no está en línea con el protocolo para la eliminación del comercio ilícito del producto del tabaco que se adoptó en noviembre del 2012 en Seúl y que lo firmaron 26 de los 27 Estados miembros de la Unión Europea, todos menos Chipre. Creo que esta directiva, en su artículo 14, tiene la oportunidad de arreglar este problema. Yo le pregunto a la Comisión si comparte la idea de que necesitamos un código único y seguro por producto, activado y controlado por las administraciones, al que se asocie una información completa que permita seguir en tiempo real la circulación de los productos del tabaco, conociendo en cada momento su situación jurídica y almacenando toda esta información para eventuales verificaciones bajo el control administrativo. ¿La Comisión estaría dispuesta a aceptar enmiendas sobre el artículo 14 para el control del fraude? Muchas gracias.
Rebecca Harms.
Ja, Herr Vorsitzender, Herr Minister, Herr Kommissar, meine Fraktion begrüßt die Vorschläge, die vorgelegt worden sind. Wir sagen endlich. Wir würden Ihre Analysen über die Gesundheitsschädlichkeit von Tabak nicht in Frage stellen. Ich würde allerdings nach dieser Debatte auch vorschlagen, dass Sie und der Ausschuss sich noch einmal mit der Interessenslage hinter dem Tabakmarkt beschäftigen. Uns ist aufgefallen, dass eine sehr mächtige und offensichtlich finanziell sehr gut ausgestattete Lobby gegen den Entwurf der Kommission anarbeitet. Und diese Macht, die wir da spüren, die muss mit enormen Profiten hinter den Tabakprodukten verbunden sein. Die Gewinnmargen zwischen dem bisschen Tabak und dem bisschen Rohstoff, das in einer Zigarette gebraucht wird, und dem Preis, der für diese Zigarette erzielt wird, diese Gewinnmargen und auch die Beteiligung der öffentlichen Kassen daran, die sollten wir uns im Rahmen dieser Beratungen noch mal klar machen, damit wir wissen, auch mit wem wir es zu tun haben. Und die zweite Frage, die knüpft an das an, was Herr Liese angesprochen hat. Wenn Elektrozigaretten Menschen von schädlichen Tabakprodukten wegführen können, warum sollen wir es erschweren oder verteuern, Elektrozigaretten zu benutzen?
Vielen Dank für die eine Minute. Und wir kommen jetzt gleich zur Beantwortung der Fragen. Und die letzte Frage, oder was mehrere Kollegen aufgegriffen haben, möchte ich auch noch mal hier unterstreichen, was die E-Zigarette angeht, weil ich habe sehr viele Zuschriften bekommen von ehemaligen Rauchern, was das Thema E-Zigarette angeht, wo gesagt wird, das ist der Weg gewesen, wie man vom Rauchen losgekommen ist, und man fängt irgendwie bei 24 Milligramm an und es wird dann gesenkt. Aber die 4 Milligramm, die jetzt im Vorschlag drin stehen, die kommen einem Verbot gleich. Und Nikotin ist meines Erachtens kein Arzneimittel, aber soll dann als Arzneimittel in einer Apotheke vertrieben werden. Vielleicht können Sie uns da noch mal auf die Sprünge helfen, wie man hier argumentieren soll, wie Ihre Argumentationslinie ist, weil das ist sehr unverständlich und hat zu sehr viel Unmut auch geführt. Als erstes möchte ich dem irischen Gesundheitsminister das Wort geben, um die Fragen zu beantworten, und dann Herrn Bort. Bitte, Herr Riley.
And thank you everybody for your contributions, and I understand that this is a big issue for some countries that are tobacco producers and depend on it from an economic perspective. But I'd just like to go through the speakers and thank Linda McAvan for her support, and Carl Hylands Florence, who's why don't we ban the toxic additives as well? I would like the Commissioner to answer that, but it's been very clear that this is a compromise directive that doesn't go far enough for many people, and I have to say including myself. But I'm prepared to live with reality. The pragmatism of politics requires that we move this on if we're going to make any progress at all. If we design, you'll forgive the British mark, Rolls Royce that will sit on a shelf and never go anywhere, or we can go for something that we can get on the road as quickly as possible. And when there are 700,000 people dying every year in Europe, we have to move as quickly as possible. So Member Rees asked what I expect from Member States, and you mentioned particularly Poland. I mean, I'm struck by the fact that the Polish Health Ministry has said that 90,000 Polish people die every year from cigarette-related, tobacco-related illness. That's a huge number of Polish people. There is a way of creating an economy outside of tobacco. This initiative will take many years to have a huge effect. There's plenty of time to change, and I think as an EU, perhaps we should look at how we can help economies that are very dependent on tobacco to move away from that. Because we do not want a situation where it's a choice between jobs or lives. I don't think that that's a choice that we should ever have to make. Lives always come first. Karl Schleiter talked about the brown packaging and regulating nicotine, and I couldn't agree more. But again, we want to get consensus here, and I believe what we have in this directive is the quickest way forward. Anna Rosbeck talked about smoking ban in cars. It's not about banning smoking in cars. It's about banning smoking in cars where children are present, strapped in, trapped, unable to get out, with smoke, which is a carcinogen swirling around their heads. And it's not largely about adults. This is actually about children. Adults have free choice. They can smoke if they wish. We do not want to interfere with their private space. But they do not have a right to smoke and harm others in the course of their habit. And I think most people, right-minded people, would agree with that. And children are below the legal age of consent when they start smoking. So what choice are they exercising? And then they're addicted. And what choice have you then when you're addicted? None. And Mr. Rossi talked about banning people who smoke. We're not banning people who smoke. And we're not anti-smoker. We want to help smokers. But what we are is anti-smoking. And enforcement, which you mentioned, is always going to be an issue. We're not infringing on people's rights, but rather enshrining and protecting the rights of others, children in particular. Martina Anderson, I'd like to thank her for her support. And you talked about what other initiatives we would take to strengthen the situation. We're going to have 10 more meetings on this subject during our presidency. And I will have the opportunity next week to meet with many of the ministers, and I'll take every other opportunity I have to consult with them and to encourage them to support this and to get their governments to support it and realise that there is a better way for an economy to progress than selling a carcinogen. Kumastakos talked about slims are aimed and are not aimed at young people. That's precisely whom they're aimed at. That's advertising, ladies and gentlemen. It looks attractive, it's nicely packaged, it's even got a nice name on it of a well-known magazine. That's reality. That's what it does to you. That's what we want people to understand when they open a packet of cigarettes, what it does to you and to those around you if you don't protect them. Can I just say that Peter Lees talked about the flavours and the data. Sorry, you mentioned about passive smoking, and I couldn't agree with you more. We do need to have more warnings around smoking and the effects of passive smoking. There was another contributor who talked about flavours and data to support it here, I think. Can I just say that I don't have the data, perhaps, around flavours, but I'm absolutely damn sure that the cigarette companies do, and that's why they're doing it. Thank you. Can I just say, Mr. Scotta, the fraud issue and the economic consequences. Well, I mean, this is an economic no-brainer. This costs. So we raise 20 billion from tobacco in the EU. We spend 23 billion on people's health, and we lose another 8 billion through, as I mentioned in my speech, absenteeism, early retirements. It's a no-brainer, but it's also a no-brainer ethically, and it's a no-brainer morally. And who in this room wants to be talking to your children in 20 or 30 years' time and say, you didn't act when you knew? And that's why someone you know, you love, you cherish, is dying in a bed from a cancer related to cigarette smoking. Can I just thank Mairead McGuinness for her support? And can I also mention the issue of fraud? Well, within the directive, there is tracking and security provisions as well. That will reduce that. And Glenis Wilmot, I agree, you know, we could go further, but as I've said, I think we have to do what we're capable of doing and accept that, you know, this would be a major step forward. I would have loved to go much further, but I have to be a realist. And you're absolutely right. Tobacco, in most instances, doesn't taste good, and that's your body senses telling you you shouldn't smoke because it's not good for you. Mr. Zanoni talked about doing more, and Westland talked about why not exclude snus from the directive, and Mr. Fellner the same, saying it's less harmful. Well, in relation to that, as the Commissioner has said, they don't have snus in California or Canada, and they brought down their smoking statistics. And I would consider, you know, this idea of something is less harmful than another, therefore it should be encouraged. Quite the contrary. I mean, I don't think anyone here would recommend somebody drive on 3-ball tyres rather than 4-ball tyres. So, can I just say, so Van Hoedsen said we're interfering with the private life of people. We're not. I've covered that point already. I've made it very clear. People, adults particularly, we're not about in any state. People can do as they wish in the privacy of their own home, but they can't be damaging other people's health in the process. And Krista Klaas, inform them and let them decide. I've covered that. How can children be in a position to decide? And then they're addicted, it's too late. Gaston Franco talked about beef being like tobacco. Well, apart from the fact that they've, you know, both are agricultural endeavours, there's nothing remotely similar. And I'm certainly not asking anyone to legalise cannabis. Pilar Ayuso said it's bad for people, but it's good for coughers, and it's good at making a lot of more people cough. So, not good for those coughers. Rebecca, Harms, and Mr. Groot, you talked about e-cigarettes and the pharmacists. Well, yeah, we should really regulate them, though, and we should have them as an aid to people to give up cigarettes. And the best chance you have of quitting smoking is under some professional healthcare advice and support. So can I just finish, and thank you very much for your indulgence, by saying, if a new drug was discovered in Europe that could save 100,000 lives a year, everybody in this Parliament would be screaming for it to be made available to our people. Yet here we have an initiative that could save 700,000 people's lives a year. So I hope you'll see it in that light. I want to say, you know, if it were discovered today, there's no question, but it wouldn't be legalised. And as others have said, I have yet to meet a smoker who wanted their child to be a smoker. And I'll just finish by saying it's not in any state. We believe in people's rights to make their own decisions and their own choices, but they must not be allowed to harm others, particularly minors, when they do that. So again, I hope the Parliament will feel fit to support this initiative and help us get it through, so that we can look back with some pride and say we were part of an initiative that saved hundreds of thousands of lives over the years. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank, Herr Minister, für ein eindrucksvolles Statement, für die Beantwortung der Fragen. Und ich glaube, zum Schluss ist das Ganze noch mal auf den Punkt gebracht worden, worum es in dieser Gesetzgebung geht. Jetzt möchte ich den Kommissar bitten, die Fragen zu beantworten, final, die von den Kolleginnen und Kollegen gestellt worden sind. Bitte, Herr Kommissar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I enjoyed this debate. It was a lively debate with opposing views. Those who have said that this directive does not go too far, and those who believe that we have gone too far. So applying the Aristotelian golden mean criterion, probably we're on the right track. And as Minister Riley said, politics is also the art of the possible. You try to do something, propose something which would have the widest consensus, rather than going too far or doing too little, that you would not have the consensus of anyone. Now, I have attended another competitiveness council. I have appeared before the Agricultural Committee and have had questions even on the smoking, on the Tobacco Directive. I am before you today. I've met MEPs, and I know what the different views are. But let's be very careful about certain arguments. For instance, that if we regulate tobacco too much, then this will have a financial consequence on state revenue. So probably the argument is, let's promote smoking so that we would replenish the coffers of the state. Or else that if we regulate these tobacco products and succeed in having less smokers in the European Union over a period of 5 years, we are aiming at 1.2 million less, that will mean losing jobs. So let us promote smoking so that through the increase in the number of smokers, we won't have any job losses. On the contrary, let's have a job increase. Let's be very careful about these arguments because they are put forward sometimes with vengeance, sometimes with a certain strength, and in times of economic crisis, they are extremely attractive as well. Do we want to reduce the number of smokers in the European Union? The answer should be yes, which explains perhaps why in this parliamentary document there is a no smoking sign. We are obliged as member states, as European Union, not to promote smoking and to make smoking as unattractive as possible. Of course, we could differ in the means to achieve that end, but the aim is extremely clear. And can I switch to Italian to reply to some questions which have been made by some Italian MEPs? Questa cosa di libertà di scelta, che cosa facciamo? Per esempio, questa è una discussione, un dibattito che è stato fatto in varie materie, per esempio se avere o no una norma mandatoria sul casco per quelli che guidano i motorini, o per esempio se avere una norma tassativa sulla cintura di sicurezza per quelli che guidano l'auto. O uno può dire, ma perché dobbiamo ingerire in questa libertà di scelta? Se lui vuole morire in un incidente del traffico è la sua responsabilità, o se lui non vuole mettere il casco sulla testa è la sua responsabilità. Ma poi la spesa e il conto per guarigione di quelli che sono involuti in questa, sono vittime di questo incidente di traffico, chi lo paga? I governi dei Stati membri e noi che paghiamo le tasse. Allora, in ogni società ci sono delle misure che non proibiscono certe cose, ma regolano certe cose. Noi non stiamo dicendo nessuno fuma, come fu la questione della proibizione, del prohibition, negli Stati Uniti dell'America con un emendamento alla Costituzione americana che proibiva il marketing, l'uso, il consumo dell'alcol in tutto un continente. Noi non diciamo così, diciamo ma se vuoi fumare puoi fumare liberamente, ma dobbiamo fare meno attraente il fumo, meno attraente il fatto che uno fuma. E questa è una cosa legittima, è una cosa che è stata sostenuta da decisioni dei nostri tribunali, della Corte di Giustizia europea, e poi la scelta è dell'individuo di fumare o no. I switch again to the English language. Will there be any delaying tactics? I have some in mind, but I wouldn't like to make them public, not to encourage the use of these tactics themselves. But it is important that we approve, by we, I mean the Council and Parliament, because the Commission has only the right of initiative, that we approve this directive during the current parliamentary mandate. Because if we do not, it would mean, under the new Parliament, having new appointment of new rapporteurs, and even though the discussion would not have come to a close, it will be prolonged. And even if we approve it in the current parliamentary mandate, all these cigarette boxes, new cigarette boxes which I have shown you, the 75% mandatory pictorial, will only come into effect at the earliest in 3.5 years from now, possibly 4 years. So if we are going to procrastinate even further, after years of Parliament insisting on a revision of the Tobacco Directive, it would mean that the tobacco industry will enrich itself even further. Now, probably someone will tell you, within this chamber or from outside this chamber, that this directive will not change anything in tobacco consumption. If that is the case, why worry about job losses? Why worry about the loss to the coffers of the state? These arguments are being put forward because this directive will make a difference. At least, hopefully, it will make a difference. And because it makes a difference, these arguments will be put forward about the economic consequences of reducing the number of smokers in the European Union. And may I add one other argument in this debate on this question. It is true that if the number of smokers declines, there will be economic consequences, but not all will be negative. Others will be even more positive and more numerous than the negative ones. Because that would mean not only that the member states will save a lot of public money on the cure of smoke-related diseases, it also means that those who will quit smoking will use the money which they save in other areas of the economy, creating new jobs as well. I won't go again and burden you with statistics, but Mr. Riley, I think, did that rather well in explaining that even the revenue from the entire tobacco industry of 20 billion is much less than what states invest and spend in the treatment of health-related diseases and in the loss of economic productivity. The argument has been put forward that when you prohibit things, they will become more attractive. And it is true that some of the most attractive things in our lives are the ones which are prohibited. But to argue that there will be more counterfeiting following this directive, I think is false, because we are introducing for the first time in a mandatory way a security feature and a tracking feature in a tobacco product. This will be the first time that this will be imposed by law. Not to protect the state coffers, but mostly not to allow other cigarette products or tobacco products not in alignment with EU legislation to enter the EU market. Of course, those who export tobacco products to countries outside the European Union are not bound by these rules. These are only rules for cigarette products, for tobacco products within the European Union. Characterizing flavors. Yes, it is a fact that characterizing flavors and also the way that cigarettes are produced and appear as tobacco products influence the decisions which young people, mostly young people, make when they decide to smoke, which is why we are regulating it. Should we prohibit all additives, all flavors? The rule of proportionality indicates that we should prohibit only those characterizing flavors. There's a definition in the directive of what a characterizing flavor is. There will be an independent panel of experts supervised by the Commission within the Member States to decide what is a characterizing flavor. So I do not think that counterfeiting or contraband will increase, particularly in view of the security features and the tracking features as well. Electronic cigarettes. The rule is clear. First of all, these should not be promoted because even though some consider them to be less harmful, they also create a false sense of security. Some people who smoke these electronic cigarettes feel that they have quit smoking because there is no smoke. But they do harm just the same. They give this false sense of security. And if I were to envisage a campaign against smoking, I would include e-cigarettes because they are addictive just the same. They lead you to consume nicotine just the same. And they are regulated in this way, that below a certain level it is enough to have a health warning. Beyond a certain level, which exists already in other tobacco products, one would need an authorization. I appreciate the comments which Honourable Zanoni and Peter Lees have put forward on passive smoking, and to consider, I believe it's already there, but we'll check again, whether to discourage passive smoking and the harms of passive smoking by including in the pictorial warnings or the health warnings a reference to passive smoking as well. On snus, I know now by heart all the arguments put forward in favour of snus, even because in the European Parliament magazine there was a special edition in favour of the lifting of the ban. And I will not put forward only the legalistic arguments, although the legalistic arguments are very strong as well, because if I give you something on a condition that you accept something else, you can't then remove one condition and allow the concession just the same. The prohibition of snus existed before Sweden joined the European Union. So technically, when Sweden joined the European Union, it should have prohibited snus as well in its own country. But this concession was made for political reasons on the condition that snus is not marketed in the European Union. And prohibiting characterizing flavours in snus would mean also only hitting 10% of the entire production of snus, which relies on the characterizing flavours themselves. And then how can we prohibit characterizing flavours for chewing tobacco inside the European Union, but allow characterizing flavours for snus as well? I look forward, Mr. Chairman, to further debates on this issue. I know that it is a sensitive issue. I know that we all want to reach the same aim, but perhaps have different ways of using which methods to reach that aim. I will defend this proposal because I feel that it is a balanced and reasonable approach. It does not lead to a nano-state. It is not regulating people's life in a fundamentalist method. On the contrary, it is a balanced approach. We are not going too far. We are going far enough to reach the aim, which I mentioned at the beginning of my address, of reducing the number of smokers over the next 5 years by 2%. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for your answers, for your statement, final statement. It was also very clear, and we will have a really fruitful debate afterwards during the legislation process. And now we will start with the second panel. And here I would like to welcome Mrs. Florence Bertiletti-Kemp. She is Director of Smoke-Free Partnership. And next speaker is Mr. Michelin Rering. He is member of the board of the Confederation of European Community Cigarette Manufacturers. And as first speaker, Mrs. Bertiletti, he has 10 minutes, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished MEPs. Today, I will not give you a presentation of the Smoke-Free Partnership and its partners. Instead, I will remind you that together, we represent thousands of doctors, nurses, and patients who often spend many long and painful years in poor health conditions from cancer, cardiovascular, and respiratory diseases. The first point that I would like to make is that the Commission's proposal is good and fair. We are particularly pleased that Member States have the possibility to introduce plain packaging, and yes, we would have liked to have seen mandatory plain standardized packaging in the proposal. Secondly, before I address the economic and health burden of tobacco in the EU, which is currently polarized into two camps, on the one hand, the tobacco industry and their allies, and on the other, everyone else, I would like to invite you to step back and recall the events that have surrounded the revision of the Tobacco Products Directive in the past 4 to 5 years. As soon as the Australian government made its decision to introduce plain packaging, the issue took center stage in the world of tobacco control. And I'd like now to tell you a story. The parallel with the biblical story of David and Goliath is appropriate. In the past few years, the tobacco industry decided to put its boxing gloves back on. From Uruguay to Australia to Norway, Goliath brought lawsuits against countries that took action to protect the health of their young people. Here, at European level, Goliath started its fight by submerging the public consultation and managed to generate a large proportion of the 85,000 contributions, a record in the history of EU consultation at EU level. Then, the tobacco industry filed a complaint against Mr. Dalli. I will not comment on the investigation underway, apart from stressing two facts. One, it should be noted that it is the tobacco industry that filed a complaint against the health commissioner. And B, that the EU values of presumed innocence should prevail. So today, on the day of the hearing, I hope we will be able to offer you a good fight. I am happy to be David for a while and to leave the experts to take my place in the second round. Goliath's strongest weapon is to use myths and lies in order to create fear and doubts in your mind. So let's explore some of them. Myth number one, we have not been listened to. Well, let's be clear, ladies and gentlemen. The main reason why the tobacco industry is saying this is because they don't like what's in the proposal. Secondly, despite what they claim, no one is saying that the tobacco industry should be excluded. However, what we are calling for in order to create a level playing field is to have total transparency when meetings take place. And indeed, recent access to document requests reveal that the tobacco industry had meetings to discuss the TPD with officials from the Secretary General and members of Mr. Barroso's cabinet. However, when we asked to get a meeting to discuss the TPD, we were referred back to the Health Commissioner. So, who has been given fair access at the highest level and who has not? As Thomas Jefferson said, there is nothing more unequal than the equal treatment of the unequal. Myth number two, the Tobacco Products Directive measures will create illicit trade. Well, on this topic, I would like you to remember two facts. First, there is considerable evidence that tobacco companies have orchestrated tobacco smuggling for their own commercial interests. And by the way, it is my understanding that Japan Tobacco International is currently under investigation. Second, the tobacco industry rarely defines what it means by illicit trade. So let me briefly tell you. Illicit trade falls under four main categories: contraband, cheap whites, counterfeiting, bootlegging. So why do you think they're always framing it as only counterfeiting? Myth number three. We are opposed to regulations that are extreme in nature and are not evidence-based. I will not spend too much time on this. The evidence will be explained in greater details by the experts later on. All I will say is that there is at least a total of 1,096 pages worth of evidence that has been reviewed by many experts on all the measures relating to the TPD. The bottom line is that the tobacco industry, they are not experts in scientific evidence. However, I would grant them to be excellent salespeople. Myth number four, the proposal will harm the economy. Well, as you said, Mr. Borge, this is not very logical. Either they say that the measures are effective and that it will harm the economy, or they say that they are not effective. And if they're not effective, how could they harm the economy? En français, on dit c'est le serpent qui se mord la queue. Now let's go to the reality. Smoking is addictive and a very hard habit to break. The best idea is not to start at all. We know that 70% of smokers start before the age of 18 and 94% before the age of 25. What this means is that about 80 million kids, 80 million people, young people, my daughter is in the room, start under the age of 15 are still at risk, and I don't want her to start. the cost to the economy. Tobacco, we have heard, is responsible for 700 deaths in the EU every year. It means 2,000 per day, 80 per hour, one person dying every 45 seconds. It also means 25.3 billion euros in smoking-induced healthcare costs, 7.3 billion euros in productivity losses, and 9.94 million lost life years equals 517 billion euros. Now, I would like you to come back to the analogy about the revision of the Tobacco Products Directive and the fight between David and Goliath. You all know that the tobacco industries are a powerful lobby, but do you know exactly how powerful they are? In 2010, the combined profits of the 6 leading tobacco companies was $35 billion. This was equal to the profits of Coca-Cola, Microsoft, and McDonald's combined. According to the Voluntary Transparency Registry, 97 full-time lobbyists defend the interests of the tobacco in Brussels with a budget of 5.3 million. These figures are only the tip of the iceberg. We, in the Smoke-Free Partnership, are only 2 people working, and those working on tobacco control in Brussels can be counted on one hand. So despite this size, David won. That's the story, that's the point of the story. We won. But what lessons can we draw from this story? Firstly, the story tells us that David won because he was not frightened, even if everyone else was, because he knew we had to fight the giant. I hope you will too. European citizens rely on you to ensure that common sense prevails over corporate interests. Secondly, the story tells us that David won because he believed and he had faith. What you have on your side is the support of the public. This revision is a deeply political and controversial process, and a very important issue for the entire EU health community. We know too well that at times of economic hardship and austerity measures, it can be tempting for governments to set public health aside and focus on economic measures. However, this crucial legislation goes to the heart of European economic recovery. It has the potential to improve the health of European citizens, the productivity of its highly skilled workforce, and protecting its young people. Before I give the floor to Mr. Goliath, I would like to thank you for listening to me and would like to leave you with one question. Whatever the tobacco industry will now say to you, will you believe them? Mr. Goliath, the floor is yours.
Frau Bertolini, erstmal vielen Dank, aber noch erteile ich hier das Wort und wer als nächstes spricht. Insofern können Sie sich jetzt darauf vorbereiten und wenn Sie mit dem Kopf nicken, dann können Sie jetzt starten, Herr Rehring. Bitte.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the Parliament, Commissioner, Minister, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of CACM, the Confederation of e-cigarette manufacturers, I thank you for the opportunity to present briefly our views on this draft directive. My name is Michiel Rehring. I appreciate it's a difficult name, but it is not Goliath. And I'm a member of the board of CACM. Cigarettes are associated with serious health risks. CACM and its members therefore support appropriate, proportionate and evidence-based regulation of our industry. We do not want children to smoke. And we support effective measures to prevent smoking by minors. As a father of 3 children, one of whom is incidentally named David, I fully support this position. CACM and its members have contributed with detailed submissions and expert reports to the 2010 public consultation. By and large, the comments that were made at the time are still valid. After publication of the proposal, our further comments were submitted to a consultation by the Irish Government Ministry of Health in January. And I invite you, if you haven't already done so, to read and consider these submissions in full. It is a missed opportunity, however, in our opinion, that only KECM has been invited and that therefore representatives of the other tobacco-related sectors do not have this chance to share their views. Today I will address the objectives of the proposal and whether these will be met. I will raise the significant economic and social unintended consequences. And as you would expect, there are important legal considerations to take into account as well. And finally, I will talk about the need for dialogue, participation and transparency. As I mentioned, we support appropriate, proportionate and evidence-based regulation. However, this proposal will not achieve its stated objectives. It will have unintended consequences, and it will increase the regulatory burden and hence our costs. That is why we are concerned. The Commission proposes to increase the size of warnings on packs. No reliable evidence has been put forward that increasing the size of warnings on packs actually reduces the number of smokers or prevents children from starting smoking. A recent US Court of Appeal decision found that the data put forward to support the introduction of larger graphic warnings in the USA amounted to, and I quote, not a shred of evidence. The same court found that the regulatory impact analysis, and I quote again, essentially concedes the agency lacks any evidence showing that the graphic warnings are likely to reduce smoking rates. This is the same USA impact assessment that the Commission's impact assessment seeks to rely on. Today's consumers in the EU are well aware of the risks associated with smoking. Providing more information to them will not lead to a change in smoking behavior. Again, no reliable evidence has been put forward by the Commission in its proposal to justify prohibiting menthol cigarettes and thin so-called slim cigarettes. And rather than providing alternative products to cigarette users, the proposal maintains the ban on Swedish snus outside of Sweden and moves most nicotine-containing e-cigarettes to the pharmaceutical category. The proposal is not a harmonization measure improving the internal market. It does not remove barriers to trade. Instead, it prohibits entire product categories. This does not improve the functioning of the internal market. It imposes restrictions on design, and it will reduce significantly our ability to innovate and compete. This does not improve the functioning of the internal market, but it is why we are concerned. It deprives consumers of choice. It is not proportionate. It introduces highly complex measures which will add significant cost for larger and for smaller companies. Finally, it also provides for member states to adopt national measures in areas covered by the proposal as well as areas that are not. This further undermines any purported harmonization. So rather than removing barriers to trade, the proposal will introduce them. It will have serious negative consequences. Smokers of products that will be prohibited overnight will either move to smoking other cigarettes, or their demand may be matched by illegal supply. This would be a huge business opportunity for smugglers and counterfeiters. And no hologram or track and trace system will prevent them from capitalizing on such an opportunity. Indeed, why does the proposal introduce these when a protocol under the Framework Convention to address illicit trade has just been adopted? These prohibitions are compounded by the fact that significant numbers of consumers of menthol and thin cigarettes are found in Finland, Poland and Bulgaria, for example, on the eastern borders of the EU. Nevertheless, no proper impact assessment of illicit trade is done by the Commission. Banning innovation and introducing packaging design restrictions will reduce our ability to differentiate our products. This unjustified interference in competition will reduce our ability to sustain premium products. It may create a trend of downtrading to cheaper, lower margin products, and that in turn will lead to lower revenue for governments, retailers, and manufacturers. That's why we are concerned. As I explained, the proposal does not improve the functioning of the internal market. It introduces rather than removes barriers to trade. It breaches EU rules on legal basis, proportionality, and subsidiarity. The proposal and its lack of reliable evidence are also inconsistent with a number of legal obligations, including freedom of expression and trade, and with protection of intellectual property rights. In particular, they are inconsistent with the EU's international trade obligations under the WTO's Technical Barriers to Trade and TRIPS IP property treaties. Finally, I will turn to allegations that the industry I represent is not a legitimate stakeholder in the EU legislative process. Article 11 of the EU Treaty provides for strong processes for interacting with associations and civil society. I appreciate that these processes are designed to protect public policy from vested interests, from all vested interests. We comply with the applicable rules, including the European Transparency Initiative and the European Parliament's Code of Conduct for Lobbyists. But we believe that it is important that all stakeholders are consulted, heard and listened to. And as a representative of CACM today, I only represent CACM member companies. Let me invite you, therefore, to listen also, at an appropriate moment, to the voices of the representatives of the 1.5 million people whose livelihoods depend fully or partially on tobacco. Before concluding, I invite you to briefly read the slide in front of you. In conclusion, let me again express my appreciation for the opportunity to participate in the hearing today. Listening to CACM now and in the future to representatives of all other tobacco-related sectors is of crucial importance. We support proportionate and evidence-based regulation. This proposal, however, is neither. In the consultation responses I referred to earlier, CACM member companies have suggested less restrictive, more targeted and proportionate alternatives. For example, measures that really prevent children from buying tobacco products. Highly effective measures that I would be happy to elaborate on at a later stage. If you have any questions on any alternative measures that we have proposed or favor, or on any other matter raised in my presentation, I would be happy to address that later. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank. Dann möchte ich das Wort erteilen an die Kollegin Ries. Weitere Wortmeldungen liegen mir nicht vor. Insofern, Frau Ries, Sie sind die einzige Fragestellerin. Okay.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. C'était une question à Monsieur Rering qui vient de s'exprimer. Je suis assez d'accord avec lui et je l'ai dit en remarque préliminaire quand il doute de l'efficacité de nos législations concernant la taille des avis sanitaires apparus sur les paquets de cigarettes. C'est bien la raison pour laquelle je parlais d'emblée de nécessaires campagnes d'information et de sensibilisation comme elles ont lieu dans les pays cités, le Canada, la Nouvelle-Zélande, l'Australie, etc. En ce qui concerne en revanche le manque de preuves dont il argue concernant les cigarettes fines et mentholées, écoutez, l'un des chiffres, je ne sais pas si on l'a cité, mais qui existe également, est celui qui concerne le cancer du sein, qui est devenu le plus meurtrier dans toute une série d'États membres, la France, la Pologne, les Royaumes-Unis, du cancer du poumon, pardon, qui supplante maintenant le cancer du sein, et c'est dû directement, selon les experts, effectivement, à ce type de cigarette-là. Donc je ne sais pas quelles études M. Rering dispose, mais nous n'avons visiblement pas les mêmes. Je voudrais lui poser une petite question concernant les cigarettes électroniques qui focalisent une bonne partie de nos débats ici. Je fais partie, comme une série d'orateurs qui sont exprimés, de ceux qui pensent qu'il doit s'agir d'un outil de sevrage, effectivement, et qu'en ce sens, le seuil qui est prévu et dont on peut discuter, dont on discutera, doit correspondre à la réalité. Je me pose des questions donc sur ce seuil, effectivement. Cela étant dit, je voudrais être bien sûr qu'il s'agit bien d'un outil de sevrage, donc je voudrais demander à M. Rering Heering qui parle ici de campagne pour viser effectivement à ce que les enfants n'achètent pas de tabac auquel ils voudraient bien participer. Étant donné l'intérêt grandissant du secteur du tabac dans celui des cigarettes électroniques, on a vu les marchés qui s'échangent, qui s'achètent, qui se vendent. Je voudrais savoir quelles sont les intentions et qu'est-ce qui nous prouve que d'ici quelques années, ces cigarettes électroniques ne deviendront pas effectivement ludiques, amusantes, fun, pop, enfin Dieu sait ce que l'industrie pourra inventer effectivement pour séduire justement des gens qu'on n'est pas censé séduire. C'est l'inverse de notre objectif et pour rester strictement un outil de sevrage.
Linda McEwan.
Thank you. My questions to our speaker from SESM. You said that your companies want to stop young people smoking. And I just wondered, are you aware of the recent study by the World Health Organization on the health behaviour in school-aged children? Because it's children who start smoking, not adults. That in 14 member states, the prevalence of boys smoking is going up in the last 5 years. And in 9 member states, for 15-year-old girls, the prevalence is up, particularly in Sweden, actually. Some of the highest figures are coming out of Sweden on this study. And I wondered, are you aware of that study? Last week, we had another hearing, and we were given a figure for the advertising, the amount spent in the United States on advertising by the tobacco industry. And we were told that we don't have a similar figure for the European Union. And I wonder whether you have a figure for the European Union and if you could share that figure with us. Now, you mentioned the court case in the United States about smoking and the lack of evidence. I wonder, are you aware of the US Surgeon General's 2012 report on preventing tobacco use among youth and adults? I won't give a lengthy quote from it, but the conclusion is that the evidence consistently and coherently points to the intentional marketing of tobacco products to youth as being a cause of young people's tobacco use. Now, you've seen the packages, both the Commissioner and the Minister have shown this House today, and I wonder if you could tell us who those packages are targeted at.
Vielen Dank. Ich lese jetzt noch mal kurz vor, wen ich hier auf der Liste habe. Wir gehen jetzt runter auf eine Minute. Eine Frage oder 2 Fragen können gestellt werden. Frau Andersson, Frau Sommer, Herr Fjellner und Schlüter. Dann hat jetzt als erstes Frau Andersson das Wort. Bitte.
Thank you. The arguments have been made in relation to illicit trade, and therefore my question is to CSM as well. I am firmly of the view that the tobacco lawyers would move quickly to shut down any copycat operations. So can the representative that spoke here today, that was called Mr. Goliath, I know that's not your name, explain the Smokes-Free Partnerships myth too, and how the illicit trade itself, how that tallies with your own record of alleged involvement in illicit trade of cigarettes. There were cooperation agreements between the European Commission and 4 of the largest tobacco manufacturers signed between 2004 and 2010, and these agreements currently require them to pay out a collective total of €1.65 billion to the EU to prevent smuggling of contraband cigarettes as part of a settlement where the European Commission agreed to drop pending litigation against these tobacco companies.
Bitte, Frau Sommer.
Vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender. Ich konnte leider den Vortrag nur am Schluss hören, weil ich erst spät kommen konnte. Dennoch, Sie vertreten ja hier die Feinschnitte. Zunächst einmal Mentholzigarette habe ich gehört aus dem Publikum. Das wäre ja ein Produktverbot, was hier ausgesprochen würde, wenn die Aromastoffe verboten würden. Halten Sie das für angemessen? Das würde zum Beispiel ja auch jeden Schnupftabak kaputt machen, denn der lebt von der Aromatisierung und Schnupftabak ist nicht gesundheitsschädlich, wie wir wissen. Dann ein zweites, die Standardisierung von Verpackungen oder vielleicht auch später von Zigaretten. Die Kommission will sich ja zu allem Möglichen selbst ermächtigen. Ist die Industrie denn in der Lage, das zu verhindern, dass dann illegale Produkte in Massen auf den Markt kommen? Ich glaube nicht, denn gerade weil die Produkte ja nicht standardisiert sind, werden illegale Zigaretten zumindest noch in Schach gehalten, wenn man sie auch nicht ganz verhindern kann. Und dann noch eine letzte Frage. Wie schätzen Sie die Kosten des Rückverfolgbarkeitssystems ein? Dankeschön.
Vielen Dank. Als nächstes spricht Christopher Fjellner für 1 Minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I have another problem with the text I have in front of me, and that's that I don't think it enough regulates the addictive and harmful content of tobaccos. I would have been much more comfortable if that would have been the approach rather than addressing the question of taste. There's been many questions on menthol, for example, and what's the proof that it's the taste that is the difference. I haven't actually heard anybody refer to that scientific data. And when I have a hard time finding scientific data, I go to my own experience. When I was younger and tried to smoke, it wasn't because it tasted good, it was because I was stupid. I thought it was cool. And I don't know anybody who's tasted a menthol cig, but it's not the taste question. So I would like to find what is the scientific facts. I haven't heard about that yet.
Vielen Dank, Herr Schlüter. Als nächstes spricht dann Rebecca Harms.
You referred to a court judgment. I have found many other court judgments saying the opposite, but I don't know exactly which one you mentioned. But what is the cigarette manufacturer's position on the fact of the effectiveness of pictorial warnings? If the court judges that it's not a shred of evidence, and you have the 2003 Canada study, you have the 2012 Cantrell study, you have the 2012 South Carolina study, you have the 2012 Rook study from Australia, you have the 2006 meta-analysis of all studies from Hammond, and all of them say that it's clearly effective. Or in any case, even if it's not super effective in some cases, it costs nothing, so it's very effective anyway, because even if it helps one, at a very low cost, it's still useful. So instead of just, maybe the court in the US have too little resources, don't have enough staff, can't check documents, but you have a lot of money in your industry. Do you believe there is not a shred of evidence that these pictorial warnings are effective?
Vielen Dank. Last but not least, Rebecca Harms.
Ja, vielen Dank. Ich habe eine Frage zu einem Problem, das das Parlament und die Öffentlichkeit sehr beschäftigt. Mich würde sehr interessieren, wie viele Leute Ihre Organisation und die anderen Dachverbandsorganisationen der Tabakindustrie, die auf europäischer Ebene arbeiten, beschäftigen. Ich würde gerne wissen, wie hoch Ihr Budget in den letzten 2 Jahren und im nächsten Jahr für diese Lobbytätigkeit hier in Brüssel ist. Und mich würde auch interessieren, warum Sie Anhörungen, öffentliche Anhörungen wie diese in diesem Ausschuss nicht für ausreichend halten, um Ihre Interessen zu vertreten, weil Sie ja doch offensichtlich sehr viele Menschen beschäftigen als Lobbyisten und ein sehr großes Budget aufgewendet haben, um diese Tabakrichtlinie zu begleiten.
Vielen Dank, Frau Harms. Und bevor ich jetzt den Experten das Wort gebe, möchte ich dem Kommissar abschließend noch mal das Wort geben, weil er uns jetzt leider verlassen muss, aber am Donnerstag schon wieder zu einem anderen brennenden Thema. Hier ist bitte Herr Kommissar Bosch.
Yes, because I have to address the Agricultural Council on the horse meat issues, on the labelling of the horse meat issue. So I would like to clarify certain points. Do we have the right legal basis? Yes, we have Article 114 and the treaties which impose on us an obligation to establish high public health standards in internal market policies. So it's Article 114 of the treaty which is very clear on these issues as regards the protection of public health in internal market policies. Secondly, these judgments of the United States, well, there are judgments which say, as Mr. Riering has said, there are other judgments of courts of equal rank which say the other. We will await, the American citizens will await the judgment of the Supreme Court. But it will not be a tragedy if the Supreme Court of the United States decides otherwise. I mean, because there are 13 member states in the European Union which have adopted pictorial warnings. If they are found in breach of the US Constitution, I don't think that's a big that's a big deal. I would be worried if the European Court of Justice were to decide in that way. But if we are in breach of the US Constitution, it does not concern European countries, it concerns American citizens, and even then we do not have a final judgment of the Supreme Court. And those countries which have introduced pictorial warnings, health warnings, even plain packaging, is there any evidence at all that illicit trade has increased? There is no evidence at all that illicit trade has increased as a result of the imposition of these rules regarding pictorial warnings or health warnings at all. And there have been judgments also of the European Court of Justice that the basis is the correct one, Article 114 is the correct basis, and that it is possible as part of the internal market to introduce rules relating to health protection. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kommissar. Und das war gut, dass Sie heute hier so prominent dann auch vertreten waren, die Institutionen, einmal die Kommission, um auf Ihren Vorschlag zu verteidigen, auf die aufgeworfenen Fragen zu antworten. Und wir schätzen es sehr. Vielen Dank, dass Sie dabei waren. So, jetzt möchte ich aber den Experten das Wort erteilen. Ladies first, für 5 Minuten. Wenn es geht, 5 minutes to answer the questions of our colleagues. Please.
I think I will be shorter because actually most of the questions were not addressed to myself. But there was one question about the effectiveness of graphic warning by Mrs. Riss, and I would like to quote just one study which is nonetheless extremely important. Uruguay introduced graphic warning 80% at the back and the front. And in the year that happened, there was a reduced consumption by young people of 8%. And for the overall population, it was actually 4.3%, which is more than the 2% that we expect to have with the measures. And so it clearly shows that it is effective. It reduced consumption by young people and by the general population. And the way we can know this is because Argentina, which is the country next to Uruguay, had an increase instead of a decrease, whilst they had not introduced any measures. So I suppose this is my conclusion. I'll be very short, and I'm sure the experts in the second round will be able to provide more evidence afterwards.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rehring, please.
Thank you. I indeed have most of the questions, and I will seek to answer them in turns. Ms. Ries asked a question around the lack of evidence, and despite the answer given by my esteemed neighbor, I think there are a number of countries where data shows that the introduction of larger health warnings has not had an actual effect on consumption or on smoking by minors. There are many studies that purport to show that larger health warnings work, but many of those studies are surveys of consumers that ask them what they think they would do. And that is not the same as actual behavior of consumers reported after a change in health warnings. I am not familiar personally with the study that Ms. Bertoletti-Kemp quoted on Uruguay and Argentina, but I can tell you that the data from Canada, where they increased health warnings from 25% to 50% a few years ago, does not demonstrate a significant change in the long-term decline of smoking incidents. To the rapporteur's question around whether I am aware of a recent WHO study, I think the answer I can give is brief. I am not aware, but I'd be happy to receive a copy, and if you are willing to discuss in a way that is transparent, we'd be very eager to have a discussion with you around that. I don't have figures around the total amount of industry spent on advertising in the EU. I represent an association that has 3 members. I do not represent other companies, and even between those 3 member companies, the data would be sensitive and I would not have any access to it. Ms. Anderson asked about illicit trade and what the industry does to shut down copycat operations. I can reassure you, where it is in our ability to do so, we do everything we can. Our trademarks, part of the discussion today, are very important to us. And we work with law enforcement agencies in many countries to try to prevent our trademarks from being copycatted, from counterfeit. Now, there are other elements of illicit trade as well. But this is the part that we can actively pursue ourselves because we own the trademarks. So we have, as companies, dedicated teams looking after trademark violations and working through the legal system to prevent copying of our packs. With regard to smuggling, we have, as was pointed out, cooperation agreements. And if I may just elaborate one point. When we are talking about Article 14 of the proposal, which implements a tracking and tracing system, this will only apply to those products manufactured in the European Union. It will apply to the products that we manufacture in the highest tax countries like Ireland and the UK. Those countries are not origins of products flowing from one to the other. The tracking and tracing system will not apply to those countries outside the European Union that are unfortunately a source of illicit trade. The AIT protocol that was adopted in November last year, as I mentioned, will apply to those countries that ratify it. So I hope that in turn has answered Ms. Sommer's question partially. If I can just add that packaging indeed is not a reason why people smoke. It is, as Mr. Fjellner said, it is an image thing. And we believe strongly that we should do everything we can to prevent children from smoking. Let me just to answer Mr. Schlitter's question, I think we have to be mindful that we do not try to address studies that say larger health warnings do this with studies that will say going from text only to graphic, for example. If the regulator, if the European Parliament and the European Council would decide to implement mandatory pictorial health warnings in the European Union, that is a different debate than taking a lot more off the size of our packs. It's currently 30%, 40%, and smokers, consumers in the EU are very well aware of the health risks associated with smoking. Increasing the size just makes the letters larger. It does not do anything. Indeed, the Commission has not demonstrated that there is an awareness gap with regard to the health risks associated with smoking. The question by Ms. Harms around how many people the industry, the 3 companies I represent today, employs in Brussels lobbying can best be answered by looking on the European Transparency Initiative on the Code of Conduct for Lobbyists website. I do not know the answer, but I can assure you it can be found there quite easily. With regard to the remark by the Commissioner, he is absolutely right to point out that the previous directive was upheld by the Court of Justice. However, we believe strongly that in that court decision there are very important elements to consider that I have mentioned today that reinforce our view that the current directive does not have a proper legal basis. It does not harmonize the internal market. It does not have as a genuine objective the harmonization of the internal market, and indeed it creates more obstacles to trade than it reduces. The Commissioner asked whether I had evidence that larger health warnings or graphic health warnings would increase illicit trade. I didn't bring any today because the illicit trade that I'm worried about is mostly going to be created by prohibitions on products that are currently smoked by large amounts of consumers in the Union. Prohibitions on menthol products, prohibitions on thin cigarettes. As I mentioned, some consumers of those products, when their products are no longer available, will turn to other cigarettes. But some of them may well turn to the illicit market. Do I have proof for that? No, because no country in the world has banned menthol and thin cigarettes as the EU is now proposing. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank. Ich hatte noch eine Nachfrage bei Karl-Heinz Florenz.
Ja, ich möchte den Vertreter der Tabakindustrie noch eine Frage stellen. Also wenn Sie sagen, dass der Einfluss der Werbung nicht so groß ist oder es sich bewiesen hat, dass er relativ klein ist, warum fürchten Sie sich dann so davor? Und zum anderen ist es so, dass Ihnen ja 700.000 Kunden jedes Jahr leider Gottes wegsterben. Und logischerweise als Unternehmer bin ich daran interessiert, dass ich an der anderen Seite dann neue dazu bekomme. Glauben Sie nicht auch, dass Werbung da ein ganz wichtiger Faktor ist?
Herr Rehring, vielleicht abschließend noch mal zur Werbung.
Apologies, I would be happy to address the question by Mr. Florence. It is packaging that does not play a role in getting people to start smoking. The same can be said about advertising, but most advertising is banned in the European Union, and indeed it was in this Parliament about 10 years ago that we were discussing the Tobacco Advertising Ban Directive. Packaging informs consumers of the product that they have available to choose from. And we use packaging and we use advertising where it is permitted to inform consumers of the availability of our products. I told you we do not want children to smoke. We don't want children to smoke. But we do want to market our products to those informed adult consumers who choose to smoke. And packaging and advertising are designed to do that.
Vielen Dank. Damit sind wir am Ende. Ja? Ganz kurz aber bitte, weil wir sind schon dazu.
I'll be very brief. As the U.S. Court of Justice has been quoted quite a few times by the person next to me, I'd like to recall Judge Kessler from 2006, who ruled that tobacco companies violated federal racketeering laws by engaging in a decades-long scheme to deceive the public about the dangers of smoking, but in particular with regards to their relation and their involvement with denying that marketing actually affects young people. Some defendants, I'm just quoting her, continues to deny that they market to youth in publications with significant youth readership and with imagery that targets youth. So I would invite everyone to just look at this ruling if we're interested in having US debates on this.
Okay, vielen Dank. Damit sind wir am Ende des zweiten Panels und der irische Gesundheitsminister, der möchte abschließend auch noch ein paar Worte an uns richten. Ich möchte mich schon mal im Vorfeld für die Teilnahme bedanken, für Ihren Beitrag und auch für die Zusammenfassung gerade. Und Sie haben jetzt abschließend das Wort. Schön, dass Sie heute da waren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I just make a few comments in relation, first of all, to thank Ms. Berletti for her excellent presentation and for her comments, and to thank Mr. Herring for being here. I have to say I can't agree with much of what you said. I find it lacks credibility to say that providing more information will not alter behaviour. And I would have to ask you, obviously, the rhetorical question, why, if it won't change behaviour, are you so scared of it? This is a health issue first and last. You talk about unjustified interference. and I'd ask you, are we not justified in saving lives? Are we not justified in reducing ill health? Are we not justified in reducing human suffering? Are we not justified in protecting our citizens and shielding our children? I believe we are. And in fact, I believe more than being justified, we're duty-bound to do it. But you did say that you had other measures that you might like to share with us that would help. And I'd be very happy to hear at another time what those measures might be, in conjunction and in addition to what we plan here. It is very worrying to hear what Linda McAvan has said to say in relation to the increasing rate of boys smoking. Again, I'd like to ask you, are you telling the Parliament you know nothing of this and your industry has nothing to do with it? Again, I'd like to thank Martina Anderson for her support in relation to the directive, and as she says, a product that kills people when it's used precisely as is intended by the manufacturer. In relation to action on the more addictive elements and harmful elements, I think that's already covered in the directive, Mr. Fanner. And Mr. Slater, who's not here now, but I mean, he made very important points. And just to support Madam Bartoletti, in relation to, you mentioned Canada. Well, since the introduction in Canada, it has been found that 4 times more smokers have expressed the wish to quit. And that's the starting point. So maybe they haven't quit yet, but hopefully they will. You talked about transparency several times, and yet when you're asked by Rebecca Harms about lobbying budgets and numbers, you fail to tell us anything. Yet we know that you have 97 full-time lobbyists on the tobacco industry here at this Parliament alone, and God knows how much money you spend on supporting them and other initiatives around this. I would suggest to you that a sensible industry, knowing what it knows now about the product that it produces, would diversify into other areas which do not have such catastrophic consequence for the people who use your product. Awareness does help, and I know that as a doctor. Because when I practiced, anybody who came to my surgery who was a diabetic at type 1 or type 2 diabetes, I would ask them to leave a note in their cigarette box, if they were smokers, that they should look at each time they lit up a cigarette. And it was a simple formula. Smoking plus diabetes equals amputation. That's the disastrous consequence of tobacco smoking for people who have diabetes. And we know that even those without diabetes will get peripheral vascular disease and lose limbs. I'm going to finish now. I was asked in the Irish Parliament after I made a statement, I had received a letter from the industry asking me not to refer to it as an evil industry again. But I would ask you, what would you call an industry that produces a product that is deliberately addictive, ensnares young people, and ultimately kills 1 in 2 of those who use it? And as others have pointed out, some quit, but many more die, 700,000 Europeans a year to be precise. And you seek to replace them. Their lives are the lifeblood of your industry. That's the long and the short of it. So yeah, I am emotive and passionate because this is a life and death issue for 700,000 of our citizens in Europe. And so I'm going to appeal again to the MPs here today, the MEPs, to use your power for good, for the good of the health of our people. Thank you very much.
Herr Minister, Sie sehen, dass Sie da unsere Unterstützung haben. Wir werden unsere Macht nutzen. Ich hoffe auch, dass Sie Ihre Macht dann im Rat nutzen, um diese Gesetzgebung zu einem guten zu wenden, zu einem guten Ende zu bringen. Ich möchte mich nochmal recht herzlich bei Ihnen bedanken, dass Sie heute Nachmittag dabei haben. Und ich möchte jetzt Frau Dr. Martina Pötschke-Langer das Wort geben. Sie ist Head of Unit Cancer Prevention in the German Cancer Research Center. Bitte, Sie haben das Wort.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Could I have please my first slide? questioning the technique that I have in my presentation? Okay, thank you very much. Thanks. First of all, good afternoon, distinguished participants. I'm representing the German Cancer Research Center that has an opinion on this draft, this proposal of the Commission on the tobacco product regulation, and I want to say you all, please go so far as you can go, and please act now. We published some papers in peer-reviewed journals and also in a known series of the Cancer Center on additives, and I think this was the reason why I am invited now. I want to start with the international consensus on the ban or regulation of all tobacco additives that was made by the partial guidelines of the implementation of Article 9 and 10 of the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. And I want to remind you that it was Europe, the European Union, that was very active in developing these guidelines. And why the Union was so active in this. And we'll switch to the next slide. What is not possible? No. Okay. Why should additives be banned in tobacco products? The reason is evidence-based, is science-based, and it's also based on the quotes of the tobacco industry. And I bring with me here a quote of British American Tobacco telling the UK government in 1999, I will say, quote this, "Ingredients are indeed used to make cigarettes more palatable and to reduce harshness and irritation. And that's it, why the industry is using the additives." So, and we know in the meantime, through a lot of articles and research, that tobacco additives can increase the palatability, the smoothness, and the attractiveness of products, and thus is indirect responsible for an increased consumption rate. That means also an increased health risk, an increased morbidity and mortality. And I bring with me only three slides on the science-based. First slide is on sugar. Looking on sugar and sugar-similar products like glucose, fructose, other ones, and honey, we will see that these additives improve the taste, decreases the harshness, and increases the palatability. And so the combustion rate, it forms carcinogens. This is scientific proved. Next is, so we first, one slide back to the sugar, I must say why we allow to sweeten the poison of tobacco. Next slide, menthol. We have many good research telling us that it's masking the harshness. And I can give you the data for this. This is no problem. We know that menthol is cooling, is pain relieving, and numbing, so it has a little anesthetic effect. We use it as a pharmaceutical product. You all maybe use it when you have cough. And you know that with menthol you can increase your inhalation. You can inhale much more deeper. So we have the effects of menthol, we know it. And regarding menthol cigarettes, we know that menthol cigarettes are in a small market in Europe so far. However, the tobacco industry intends to grow this market. We know this from their own documents and from their speeches on their own meetings. So we have to fear this growing market in menthol, but also menthol is used not only in mentholated cigarettes.
nearly every brand has a little bit menthol together with other additives. Next point is licorice. We have the evidence that increases the palatability, so that it increases really the palatability of the poison tobacco. It improves the flavor. It improves all the taste. And it's enough evidence there. And we have a lot of clear science showing the carcinogenic effect when it's burned, when it the pyrolysis, when the tobacco is inhaled. So, on the other side, we have also additives without flavor, like binders, humectants, and coloring agents. They are forming through the combustion or pyrolysis carcinogenic substances too. And we have also the evidence for this. So, but these non-flavored additives, they increase the attractivity, of course, of the products. Then next, I'm coming to a market that is now focused as by the Commission's proposal to ban the market for characterizing flavors. Of course, this market should be banned. Of course, we cannot allow that substance like vanilla, menthol, mango, chocolate, or other fruit exotics, and so on, are in cigarettes and increasing the attractivity. But currently, it's really a small market. So that it's danger, of course, for the increasing the irritation, the initiation of young people by these products. But the big market is another one, and I want to focus more on this big market that must be also regulated. Then you must not forget who is the leading brands, and all these substances and all this mix of additives, they allow the tobacco industry to add them, to make the products much more palatable, and to reduce the harshness and irritation. They say it again and again. So it's a clear facilitation of initiation and maintenance of smoking. And another effect is, with these many additives coming together, it's an interaction, and it's a synergistic effect of additives. So especially the mixture of small amounts of several additives can have similar effects as bigger amounts of one single additive. So, and many additives produce carcinogen substances on pyrolyzers. For them it's no harmless threshold levels for additives. So please bring in consideration these many mixtures of really dangerous substances when they are burned. My next slide is coming up to a new technology that was made for attraction, to attract more consumers for the poison of tobacco. And these are these capsules with filter systems which enhance the attractivity of the products. So finally, what should be done? What are our recommendations? We are voting for a ban of all additives that may enhance the palatability, smoothness and attractiveness of tobacco products. Why? To protect the youth from initiation, but also to support smokers to quit smoking. What should be done again? Ban of all additives that are carcinogenic in unburned and in burned form. Why? To protect the consumers and to reduce morbidity and mortality. And finally, what should not be done? Set a maximum levels for any additives. Why?
We have no reliable methods to define a threshold level for distinctive taste. And there are many interactions between additives with synergistic effects on palatability, smoothness, and inhalation. Finally, my summary is, a ban is needed on additives that enhance palatability, smoothness, and attractiveness of tobacco products. A ban is needed on additives that are carcinogenic in unburnt or burnt form, and manufacturers and importers must prove that any additive they want to use is really harmless. And with pleasure, the German Cancer Research Center will provide the data, the facts, the science to you, and also a proposed list for banning which kind of additives and also which of those additives that should be excluded from the ban. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Pötschke-Langer. Als nächstes hat dann das Wort Luke Jossens, he is Advocate Officer, Association of European Cancer League. And now for 10 minutes, please. The floor is yours.
Mr. Chair, members of Parliament, I will address the issue of illicit trade. I have been investigating illicit trade since 1992 and have published in peer-reviewed articles. The reason why I mention this is that the tobacco industry makes claims which are not being reviewed in scientific journals. 20 years ago, the industry was saying that this problem of smuggling was a very easy one. It was linked to the level of taxation. If taxation was high, smuggling was high. If taxation was low, smuggling was low. The reality 20 years ago was different in the sense that Denmark had high taxes and low smuggling, and Spain had the lowest level of taxation and huge smuggling, and Italy had low taxes and huge smuggling. For what reason? The reason was that the industry, American tobacco companies, were organizing the smuggling. This was not only my opinion, but it was also the opinion of this Parliament in 1997 during the Transit Committee, and it was also the opinion of the European Community who sued the tobacco companies. As a result, in 2004, Philip Morris settled and paid $1.25 billion. GTI paid in 2007 $400 million, and 3 tobacco companies in Canada paid $1.7 billion Canadian dollars. One could say, well, this is the past, but they are not doing it again. Well, we have a complaint against GTI launched in November 2011. What is in fact the cause of illicit trade? It's more complex. It's a question of demand and supply, and the demand is mostly driven by price, and the supply is by legal and illegal tobacco companies looking for more profits, increasing market shares, facilitated by corruption, the presence of criminal networks, and weak government enforcement capacity. Generally speaking, the price plays a role, but other factors are more important, and we see often that the supply side is much more important than the demand side. We have done a study in 18 European countries, which was published in the scientific journal Tobacco Control online in December and in press next year. And we looked at illicit trade in 18 countries, and the data show that illicit trade is not directly related to tobacco prices, but is more frequent in countries with a land or sea border with Ukraine, Russia, Moldova, or Belarus. We noticed, for instance, that the country with the lowest prices are this time Latvia and Lithuania, and have the hugest illicit problem. Coming back now to the claims of the industry has launched a campaign saying that plain packaging would lead to increased illicit trade. This is from a website of Philip Morris, and it says various experts have expressed concerns that plain packaging will increase illicit trade by making cigarettes easier and cheaper to copy. So it says easier and cheaper to copy, and you will see there a white pack. In a campaign from GTI in the UK, they will use also white packs to present plain packs. The reality is that plain packs are not white and will contain pictorial health warnings and security features. So what they are doing is mispresenting the case. They have been saying now, well, of course, these pictorial health warnings, they may have pictorial health warnings, but it's the brand features which makes it more difficult to copy. Again, this is nonsense, and the nonsense is using what the tobacco industry is saying themselves. Every product is easy to copy. Every design is easy to copy. And this comes from Philip Morris, not in a campaign against plain packaging, but in order to promote their tracking and tracing system Codentify, where it says, evidence shows that counterfeits can make copies of even the most sophisticated paper stamps in 3 weeks. That's the reality. Everything which is visible is easy to copy. The other thing is, well, it will make products cheaper to copy. Again, this is not true. The production cost, the manufacture cost of a pack of cigarettes, of a counterfeit pack, is between 10 to 12 cents. If we can imagine that the packaging costs 1/3 of it, it will cost the packaging between 3 and 6 cents. Even if you do some saving on that, you will save 1 cent, 2 cents on the price which could cost between €4 and €10. Again, I'm quoting Philip Morris documents which agree that the manufacturing cost is very low. And what about the impact assessment? Well, the impact assessment came to the same conclusion on page 93. The industry has argued that plain packaging will increase illicit trade. However, no convincing evidence has been submitted. That's the reality. They never provide evidence which has been reviewed in peer-reviewed articles. What has been the opinion of impact assessment in the UK? Well, in the UK on page 20 it says, standardized packs would still need to carry colored picture warnings, so it will not be white packs, as well as covered markings. And counterfeiters are already able to produce sophisticated replicate goods. So that's the reality. Everything is counterfeitable, and they should stop to make this nonsense about plain packaging increasing illicit trade. But of course they will say that also about the ban on display. They are saying that the display ban will increase illicit trade. In Canada, display bans have been introduced in the provinces at different dates. Most of them have introduced them in 2008. Since 2008, there has been a dramatic drop of illicit trade, and in 2010 there has been a ban on flavored tobacco products in force since July 2010. Since then, there has been a dramatic drop of illicit trade, which again is an indication that illicit trade is a little bit more complicated than the industry pretends. Now coming back on the illicit trade protocol, which has been adopted on the 12th of November in South Korea. To be clear, this has been adopted. It's still not in force. It has to be ratified by 40 countries. So far, 13 countries have signed it, but you need to have 40 ratifications. The illicit protocol is an international convention and makes an obligation of unique, secure and non-removable identification markings on all packaging, packs, cartons and master cases. I want to remind you that in the Commission proposal it's only an obligation for unique identifiers on packs, but not on cartons and master cases, and there should be also an obligation for the outside packaging. One of the essential obligations in this illicit protocol is the role of industry. and you have Article 8 of the Protocol 8.12, obligations assigned to a party shall not be performed by or delegated to the tobacco industry, and the system shall be controlled by the parties. Our comments in relation to EU traceability proposals is, considering the long history of industry complicity and the fact that still one major company is being accused of organized smuggling, the tobacco industry should not choose the data storage company and the auditor for the traceability data. The choice of the data storage company should be a decision by the member states, and the choice of the auditor a decision by the EU Commission. The data storage should be hosted at member states and EU level and not per company as being defined in the actual EU proposals. And one important comment also, if you want to have traceability, you should have a link between unique identifiers on packs and the outside packaging. Otherwise, if your pallet goes through the supply chain, you have to open the pallet, you have to open the master cases, you have to open the cartons, you have to open the packs to put the recording of new events. It's impossible to have a tracking and tracing system between aggregation. On conclusion, there is no evidence for the industry claims that plain packaging will increase illicit trade. Plain packaging will always have large pictorial health warnings and a security feature. Every pack is easy to counterfeit. And the choice of the data storage company of traceability should be a decision by the member states, and the choice of the auditor a decision by the EU members. Obligations on the traceability should not be delegated or performed by the tobacco industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is Mr. Josens. The next speaker is Dr. David Hammond, Associate Professor in the School of Public Health and Health Systems at the University of Waterloo, Canada. Please, Mr. Hammond, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you today. I've been asked to discuss the evidence as it relates to packaging and labeling policies in the proposed directive. And just by way of disclosure, we've had some discussion about the names David and Goliath. My name is David, but I assure you it's a coincidence. Also, in terms of disclosure, I have served as an expert witness in several court cases, including those that involve packaging and labeling in Australia and elsewhere, and I have advised a number of governments and regulatory bodies, including the European Commission, on packaging and labeling. Now, advertising and marketing has played a fundamental role in the rise and fall of global tobacco use and in shaping attitudes towards smoking. Most recently, tobacco promotion has had to evolve in response to disappearing marketing channels due to increased regulation. In the absence of traditional advertising, packaging has become more important. And for packaging to succeed, it must reach potential smokers as early as possible and not simply communicate the qualities of the cigarette itself, but to assume the role of lifestyle advertising. Now, in brief, packaging matters because of its tremendous reach. There are somewhere around 100 million smokers in Europe. The average smoker will see their pack many thousands of times per year. And more importantly, packs have very high levels of visibility, including among non-smokers and young people, in places of retail and in other areas. Now, I'm going to discuss evidence in 3 areas of packaging, beginning with what I call standardized, what many people refer to as plain packaging. And this is what plain packaging looks like in practice. Brand logos and imageries are prohibited, the color is standardized, and all government-mandated information, including health warnings, remain on packs. It does not prohibit different varieties or names. If there were 15 varieties of Marlboro prior to implementation, there can be 15 varieties of Marlboro following. Now, Australia was the first country in the world to implement plain packaging in December of 2012. New Zealand recently announced it would follow. Tobacco companies have launched 3 separate legal challenges in Australia, one of which has concluded, in which the High Court of Australia upheld the plain packaging law. One of the factors addressed in these court cases is evidence, the likelihood of public health benefit. Now, plain packaging has only been in place for a couple of months in Australia. It's too early to assess the impact. But there is a vast evidence base on the influence of pack design, including experimental studies of plain packaging. This includes many published studies, government-commissioned research in Australia, and in fact, some of the best evidence comes from the industry itself. And here I'm talking about confidential documents that tobacco companies have been required to release through court cases. They include extensive consumer research and information on marketing strategy. Overall, there's unequivocal evidence that packaging can influence consumer behavior. There's very good case studies, examples like this one, the Benson & Hedges Silver Slide Pack. When it was introduced into the UK market, it had a very important increase in market share despite few other forms of promotion. Plain packaging can also help reduce the false beliefs about the relative risks of different brands. In other words, the belief that some varieties are perceived to be less harmful than others. And here I'm talking about brands that used to be referred to as light or mild. Perhaps most importantly, there's unequivocal evidence that plain packaging reduces brand appeal, particularly among youth and young people. There are, for example, experimental studies that have found that youth are less likely to accept an offer of cigarettes if the cigarettes are offered in a plain package rather than a branded package. Now, given the nature and strength of nicotine addiction, I think it remains to be seen if plain packaging will reduce smoking among adult smokers. It's possible, perhaps even probable, but I would say the impact is likely to be modest. In contrast, there's a very high likelihood that plain packaging would reduce smoking initiation among young people in the long term. Now, it's very difficult to try and assess the magnitude of reduction, but it's because of the reach of plain packaging, which essentially would be universal among legal products, that even a small impact at the population level can accrue into meaningful benefit. If there are 100 million smokers in the EU, and if plain packaging were to succeed in changing behavior in only 1%, 1 in 100, that translates into 1 million fewer smokers in Europe. Now, as part of the plain packaging regulations, Australia has also restricted the size of packs, such that packs of slim cigarettes are now illegal. This serves as a precedent for the ban on slims proposed in the European directive. Some of you may know that slims and super slims are among the fastest growing segment in the tobacco market. I recently reviewed internal tobacco industry research and marketing on pack shape, pack size, and different types of openings. Tobacco industry research clearly and consistently demonstrates that slim cigarettes are associated with false health beliefs, including the belief that they're lower tar when that's not the case, and that slims reinforce the belief that smoking is an effective way to lose weight or stay slim. And I'd like to emphasize this point. There was a report that was released in the past 2 weeks from the U.S. National Bureau of Economic Research, which found that 46% of girls and 30% of boys are smoking in part to control their weight. Slim cigarettes reinforce this belief. And as others have pointed out, 80 to 90% of smoking initiation begins in childhood or youth. Industry documents also show that slim cigarettes are marketed predominantly to young women. This is a document from Philip Morris, which identifies teenage girls between the age of 15 and 17 as being the target. One of the other consequences of different pack shapes, especially the narrow super slim packs, is that they have the potential to distort health warnings. Here are two examples of tobacco packages in Canada, and you can see that the text on the left is rendered so small that it's almost illegible, and the image required by the government is also distorted. And there's consumer perception research that shows that the same warning on a slim pack is deemed to be less impactful than a traditionally sized pack. Now, the last area I'd like to talk about is health warnings. I think it's fair to say that, like the industry, the government is learning to use the package to communicate with the public. And the evidence base in this area is very large and growing. There are well over 100 published studies in scientific journals. These studies include everything from eye tracking, fMRI brain scan studies, to very large cohort studies with many thousands of participants. Now, the Keckham presentation earlier referred to a U.S. court case suggesting that large picture warnings have not passed legal scrutiny. The presentation failed to note that there's a separate U.S. Court of Appeals judgment which has upheld the warnings. I'm very familiar with this case, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. The fact is that more than 50 countries have successfully implemented large picture warnings. Tobacco companies have issued legal challenges in many of these jurisdictions, and I am not aware of a single case in which a court has permanently struck down health warnings. So to suggest that there's no reliable evidence is to regard both the scientific evidence base and the judgment of courts throughout the world. So what does this evidence say? Large picture warnings do lead many smokers to consider quitting and prompt many to make a quit attempt. Having said that, I would say the primary functions of warnings is not to make adult smokers quit, even if this occurs. Rather, the primary function is to reach children and youth before the age when smoking initiation occurs. And there is evidence to show that 60% of non-smokers in the UK can recall a specific message from packs, and 4 in 10 never smokers in the UK say that the health warnings have persuaded them not to start smoking. That number is closer to 9 in 10 in Canada. And I would add, and I want to be very clear about this, there is published scientific evidence that large picture warnings have reduced smoking prevalence. I am from Canada. I am intimately familiar with the data, and I can tell you that we have had a dramatic decline in smoking following the implementation of picture warnings. The year following the introduction of the warnings, we had our largest decline in smoking on record in the past 60 years. This is not a matter of opinion, it's a matter of fact. Where do EU countries currently stand with respect to international standards? As I mentioned, more than 50 countries have implemented warnings. Countries like Cayman Islands, Mauritius, the Cook Islands have implemented pictorial warnings. Many EU member states have not. This slide gives you a sense of the size of warnings in other countries and the standards that have been established in other jurisdictions. And whereas pictures currently appear on only one side of European packs, most other countries include pictures on both sides, in part because it increases the visibility of these warnings at the point of sale. Health warnings do wear out. We've been tracking them in Canada. Like any advertising campaign, the EU warnings are approximately 10 years old, and some jurisdictions have been very good at refreshing the message content, and we know that that's an important factor in their effectiveness. The only other thing I'll say about content is as warnings get bigger and more shocking, they need to remain credible, and using real people is a very effective way of communicating that to smokers. And in addition to shocking information, it is important to provide supportive information for smokers trying to quit. Now, I'd like to finish by saying that for all I've said today, I think the effects of these packaging policies are fairly straightforward. The pack on the left is what you would expect a consumer product to look like that kills almost 2,000 people in Europe each day. The package clearly discourages use. In contrast, the pack on the right, the current standard in the European Union, still serves as an inducement to smoke and does more to promote rather than discourage use. Ultimately, I think this is what both common sense and the scientific evidence indicates. Thank you very much.
The Rednerin is Dr. Jane King. She is Director of Tobacco Control. Please, 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. I thank you for giving me the chance to talk about interference by the tobacco industry in tobacco control policies and what we should be doing about it. Very briefly, Cancer Research UK is a research organisation with the largest non-government funded research body, and we research into the causes, treatment and prevention of cancer. We have to work on tobacco because over a quarter of all cancer deaths are caused by tobacco. We can't ignore it. But as a research organisation, we also make sure that everything we say on this issue is very strongly evidence-based, unlike comments that have been made about a lack of evidence on what we're talking about today. I'd like to talk about why we need to oppose the tobacco industry, what the industry did to try and prevent the original Tobacco Product Directive, and what Article 5, what we can learn from that, and what Article 5.3 says, and how we need to move forward to meet our obligations under the FCTC. So, first of all, why should we oppose the tobacco industry? We've heard about the toll on lives in the EU. Also, though, we haven't heard so much about how the tobacco industry has sought to block, amend or delay key legislation in the EU aimed at protecting the health of citizens. And there's a very large body of evidence which shows that the tobacco industry has distorted science, it's tried to suppress research or produce biased research, it's paid scientists to present biased research. It's also used front groups to make its case, and it's not always clear that these groups are representing the tobacco industry. It's lied for decades about the harm that its products cause. It's facilitated smuggling, as we've heard, used additives to increase the addictiveness and attractiveness of tobacco to children, and it's targeted marketing at children, women and the poor. And there are just some references of reviews that in themselves look at hundreds and hundreds of references, and we'd be happy to provide more evidence if that's required. So we're not dealing with a normal consumer product. We've heard that it kills 1 in 2 long-term users. If it came to the market today, it would not be allowed. And we're not dealing with a normal industry. As the research evidence shows, the tobacco industry has sought to obfuscate, deny the harm its product causes, and delay or block measures to protect citizens, especially children, because please remember, this is not an adult choice. This is an addiction started in childhood. And we know that in the UK alone, 157,000 11 to 15-year-olds start smoking every year. So imagine how many children start smoking across the EU, and we want to stop that. So let's look at how the tobacco industry sought to stop us getting the Tobacco Product Directive in the first place. As many people will be aware, due to litigation in the US, there's millions of pages of internal tobacco industry documents on the internet, and these have been the subject of academic research. And the University of Bath looked in particular at this, and it's a long report that's available on the Smoke-Free Partnership website and has been published in peer-reviewed journals. And basically, 3 principal arguments were used against the directive: that it was outside the scope of the EU's powers, that it contravened existing trade agreements, and would have adverse economic impacts. So if these arguments sound familiar, it's because they're the same ones being used again. And the tobacco industry often uses arguments that it's been advised are groundless because it can afford to delay things, to introduce costly legal proceedings and so on. But these arguments didn't prevent us getting a real gold standard piece of legislation in the form of the Tobacco Product Directive. So moving on to Article 5.3 of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, which aims to protect citizens from tobacco through a series of measures, it's clear to the World Health Organization and to the 176 countries that have now ratified it that the tobacco industry cannot be dealt with like a normal stakeholder. So that the Framework Convention, Article 5.3 says there's a fundamental and irreconcilable conflict between the tobacco industry's interests and public health policy interests. And it goes on to say that the broad array of tactics that the industry has used to interfere with setting and implementing tobacco control measures is well documented. Therefore, government should establish measures to limit interactions to the tobacco industry and ensure the transparency of those interactions that do occur. And the guidelines go on to talk about that parties should interact with the tobacco industry only when and to the extent strictly necessary to enable them to effectively regulate the tobacco industry and tobacco products. So that's very clear guidelines. And where interactions with the tobacco industry are necessary, parties should ensure that they're transparent. Wherever possible, they should be conducted in public and records made available. And parties should formulate and implement a code of conduct for officials prescribing the standards with which they should comply in their dealings with the tobacco industry. So it behoves the EU institutions to live up to this best practice and these highest international standards as the rest of the world looks to the EU. And so what are these best practices and international standards? We know that there are current measures that the Parliament and the Commission have introduced, but these are inadequate to meet the obligations and standards established by Article 5.3, and they were introduced before the FCTC. What we need is a code of conduct specifically in relation to the tobacco industry. We need to make sure that there are rules for commissioners and officials that are very clear that we shouldn't be working with PR firms and legal firms and other bodies that have tobacco industry interests, and that all contractors should declare any such interests. And tobacco industry representatives should not be on advisory groups or policy committees and so on. Furthermore, we need to ensure that there's the registration and disclosure of lobbyists. It should be mandatory for all lobbyists. We should make sure that all meetings between officials and MEPs and tobacco industry interest groups are published on the internet. And of course some MEPs are already doing this, and the Greens, we noted, have established a register for this purpose. MEPs should make sure that in the Member States we're also meeting our obligations under Article 5.3. So, for example, the UK Department of Health lists all its meetings with tobacco industry groups. And wherever possible, minutes of meetings should be published at both Member State and EU level to ensure transparency. So we believe that the tobacco industry can make its submissions in writing to officials. They should be able to express themselves. We think that face-to-face meetings should comply with the FCTC. In other words, they should only take place when strictly necessary to enable them to effectively regulate the tobacco industry and tobacco products. If EU institutions adopt clear guidelines that meet our FCTC obligations, it would be sending a message to the world that the EU places the health of its citizens above the financial interests of an industry that has no respect for health whatsoever. Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Wir kommen dann zur Debatte mit den Kolleginnen und Kollegen. Und als erstes spricht Frau Pananova. Bitte. Frau Pananova.
Thank you, President. I will speak in Bulgarian, so please, everybody, could you put your headphones. Много благодаря на експертите, които изложиха своите становища, защото тук изглежда, че ние предлагаме пакет от мерки, които индустрията ни убеждава, че няма да проработят, и изглежда така, сякаш индустрията има по-добри предложения как да бъдат ограничени съответно въздействието. No? No?
Eine Übersetzung fehlt uns. Es war nicht angesagt, dass wir Bulgarisch nicht zur Verfügung haben. Insofern bitte ich das nochmal zu klären in den Kabinen, damit die Kollegin auf Bulgarisch sprechen kann.
Shall I repeat from the beginning? Okay, I'll start.
Bitte noch einmal von vorne.
Okay.
Wir halten die Zeit.
I'll start from the beginning. Първо благодарих на експертите, които изложиха своите становища, защото от разговорите и от това, което предварително чухме от табакоиндустрията, изглежда така, сякаш ние предлагаме пакет от мерки за ограничаване на тютюнопушенето, а индустрията смята, че този пакет от мерки няма да проработи и като че ли имат по-добри идеи как това да се случи, защото ние всъщност сме решени да направим това. Има безспорни доказателства, не като преди 20 години, че тютюнът убива. И то убива доста сериозно като бройка европейски граждани и не само европейски граждани. Даже аз, може би, и трябва и да спомена случая, където така известното лице на мачо кълбой на Марлборо почина след 40 години пушене само на Марлборо, точно от рак на белия дроб. Беше само 2002 година, когато Филип Морис устойности мъртво тяло на човек починал от тютюнопушене, като добавка към социалната и здравна система, т.е. ако умреш малко по-раничко от това, че си пушил, на $2180. Нали? Много добре, може би по време на криза трябва да се пуши малко повече, за да има повече такси в хазната и да се спестяват пари, като се умре по-рано, за здравните сметки. Но след всичко това, което чух, аз си постарах се бързичко така адхок да напиша един пакет от мерки, който може би на индустрията ще им се сторят малко по-работещи, отколкото това, което ние предлагаме. Например, да споделят заплащането на здравните сметки на хората, които боледуват или съответно умират от болести, причинени от никотина. Като съответно може да се повиши контрола, например, на нелегалната търговия и сметките за това също да бъдат платени от табакоиндустрията, защото не е проблем това да се увеличи контрола и да няма нелегална търговия с цигари или пък с фалшиви такива. Следваща мерка, например, вместо да опаковката да има плашещи картинки или да е бяла, то нека всяка цигара да има примерно плашеща картинка и индустрията да си плати за това. Следващото да има пълна прозрачност за средствата за R&D, както за реклама и за лобизъм на индустрията и да се поддържа база данни на тази прозрачност и индустрията също да плати за база данни. Следващото е поетапно пренасочване на заетите от този бизнес към друг поминък и разходите също могат да бъдат поети от индустрията, така че 1,5 милиона европейски граждани да не си загубят препитанието. И последно, например, забраната на селскостопански субсидии на национално ниво за производство на тютюн, като разходите по промяната на заетостта на селскостопанските производители също да бъдат поети от индустрията. Струва ми се, че тези мерки сигурно ще бъдат възприети като малко по-работещи и ми се струва, че индустрията трябва да обсъди как да ги подкрепи, например.
So, vielen Dank. Peter Liese.
Ja, vielen Dank an die Referenten. Ich möchte noch mal darauf hinweisen, dass ich persönlich den Vorschlag im Kern unterstütze. Aber ich bitte trotzdem um ein faires Verfahren. Und, Herr Volzner, hier gab es Beifallsbekundungen. An anderer Stelle haben Sie immer gesagt, dass die Zuschauer eben nicht Beifallsbekundungen durchführen sollten. Das müssen wir einheitlich halten. Ich habe 2 Fragen an unsere Experten. Erstens zum Passivrauchen. Es wird von Seiten der Industrie angezweifelt, dass die Daten zum Passivrauchen so hart sind, dass wir wirklich von so vielen Todesfällen sprechen können, wie die WHO sagt. Ich habe selber an einer Studie teilgenommen zum plötzlichen Kindstod, also als Arzt, bevor ich im Parlament war, eine europaweite Studie. Das ist für mich eine klare Sache, dass plötzlicher Kindstod mit Passivrauchen zusammenhängt. Aber wie sieht es aus bei den anderen Schädigungen durch Passivrauchen? Wie ist das wissenschaftlich abgesichert? Da es meiner Ansicht nach einige Daten gibt, will ich noch mal meinen Vorschlag erneuern, dass wir auf das Passivrauchen mehr Wert legen, dass wir eben nicht 90% der Warnhinweise haben auf die Gesundheit des Rauchers bezogen, sondern auf die Gesundheit von Kindern und anderen, die den Rauch einatmen, obwohl sie das nicht kontrollieren können, dass man da viel noch stärker sowohl die Textwarnung als auch die Bilder darauf hinweist. Da gibt es gute Beispiele aus anderen Ländern. Und das würde ich gerne anregen, dass wir das aufnehmen. Und dann noch mal die Frage zu den E-Zigaretten. Ich will das noch mal deutlich machen. Der Vorsitzende hat es ja auch angesprochen. Niemand behauptet, dass E-Zigaretten die Gesundheit fördern. Aber ich habe von vielen Leuten Zuschriften bekommen, die sagen, für mich war es der Weg, von der Zigarette wegzukommen. Ich belästige damit die Umgebung zumindest weniger. Auch beim Passivrauchen ist klar, dass bei der E-Zigarette, wenn überhaupt, nur wenig Gefahren sind. Und wir haben, gegen meinen Widerstand gebe ich zu, aber beim Heroin hat die EU eine Politik der Harm Reduction. Da verteilt man Spritzen, da verteilt man Heroin von staatlicher Seite. Warum wollen wir denn die E-Zigarette komplett aus dem Markt drängen? Ist das nicht etwas Ähnliches?
Frau Sommer, bitte.
Ja, vielen Dank. Also diese Frage zur E-Zigarette hätte ich auch gehabt, in genau dieser Art und Weise. Ich habe auch noch weitere Fragen. Die erste Rednerin, ich habe den Namen jetzt hier gerade, doch, Frau Pötschke Lange. Sie haben immer gesprochen von dem Gift Tabak, the poison tobacco. Ja, und dann von allen anderen Giften, die da reingemischt sind, wenn Tabak doch jetzt wirklich so ein Gift ist. Und die Frage geht ja dann auch an unseren Gast aus Kanada. Warum gibt es denn dann eigentlich noch Tabakwarnung? Warum ist denn dann auch in Kanada nicht grundsätzlich die Tabakware verboten worden? Eigentlich wäre das doch die Konsequenz von allem, was wir hören. Ja? Der Tabak kann ja nicht in Ordnung sein, er darf eigentlich gar nicht auf dem Markt sein, weil er so giftig ist. Aber er ist auf dem Markt. Und selbst in den Ländern, in denen die schärfsten Kennzeichnungen beschlossen wurden, egal vor welchem Hintergrund, die Tabakprodukte gibt es noch. Können Sie mir vielleicht dazu was sagen? Ich meine, das ist ja vielleicht auch mal eine grundsätzliche Überlegung, die man hier anstellen müsste. Und dann hätte ich noch eine Frage zum zweiten Redner, glaube ich. Da wurde gesagt, ja, die Verpackung beeinflusst auf jeden Fall das Verbraucherverhalten. Dazu gibt es ausreichend Studien. Könnten wir vielleicht mal eine Liste haben, welche Studien es da gibt? Also es wird mir hier die ganze Zeit viel erzählt. Dazu gibt es Studien, dazu gibt es Untersuchungen, dazu hat der mal was gesagt. Aber mir kann man viel erzählen. Ich möchte bitte mal genau wissen, wo was steht und hätte gerne am liebsten diese Studien. Ich glaube, sonst können wir darüber überhaupt nicht entscheiden. Und über die Klaköre im Hintergrund habe ich mich auch geärgert, aus grundsätzlichen Erwägungen. Das geht nicht.
Aus grundsätzlicher Erwägung ist ja auch Klatschen und Beifallsbekundungen sind hier nicht gestattet.
Ja, Moment. Es kommt immer darauf an, durch wen. Ja, ich bin sehr für Offenheit. Und
Sie haben jetzt nicht mehr das
tagen
Wort,
öffentlich,
Frau Sommer.
Aber ich finde es nicht in Ordnung, dass Sie das
ja,
so
Frau
zulassen.
Sommer, ich habe gerade gesagt, dass es grundsätzlich nicht gestattet ist. Und ich bin durch Herrn Liese darauf hingewiesen worden. Und so wird auch verfahren. Ja? Gut. Als nächstes hat dann der Kollege Kumu Zarkos das Wort. Bitte. Für 1,5 Minuten, wenn es geht, weil sonst kommen wir mit der Zeit nicht mehr hin.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ κύριε Πρόεδρε. Δύο σημεία θέλω να θίξω, τα οποία και τα δύο τα παίρνω από την εισηγητική έκθεση. Το πρώτο σημείο λέει το εξής, η εισηγητική έκθεση. Ο γενικός στόχος αναθεώρησης της οδηγίας είναι να βελτιωθεί η λειτουργία της εσωτερικής αγοράς και βεβαίως να προστατευτεί η δημόσια υγεία. Όλες οι ρυθμίσεις που βρίσκονται στην πρόταση βοηθούν τη λειτουργία της εσωτερικής αγοράς, τη βελτιώνουν ή τις δημιουργούν προβλήματα. Αυτό το λέει η εισηγητική έκθεση. Ο σκοπός είναι να βελτιωθεί η λειτουργία της εσωτερικής αγοράς. Υπάρχουν διατάξεις που δεν ανταποκρίνονται σε αυτόν τον στρατηγικό στόχο της οδηγίας. Δημιουργούν προβλήματα στην εσωτερική αγορά. Ξαναλέω λοιπόν ότι ψάχνουμε ένα μείγμα μεταξύ προστασίας της δημόσιας υγείας και της προστασίας της εύρυθμης λειτουργίας της εσωτερικής αγοράς. Και είμαστε σε θέση, πιστεύω, το Ευρωπαϊκό Κοινοβούλιο, χωρίς θρησκευτικούς φανατισμούς, να βρει αυτή τη λύση. Δεύτερο σημείο. Πάλι από την εισηγητική έκθεση και τελειώνω, κύριε Πρόεδρε. Η πρόταση, λέει η εισηγητική έκθεση, εξαιρεί από ορισμένες διατάξεις, όπως παραδείγματος χάρη την απαγόρευση προϊόντων με χαρακτηριστικά αρώματα, γεύσεις, τα προϊόντα καπνού, που είναι διαφορετικά από τα τσιγάρα, τον καπνό για στριφτά τσιγάρα και τα μη καπνιζόμενα προϊόντα καπνού, δηλαδή πουρα, πουράκια κλπ. Και αυτή την εξαίρεση την θεμελιώνει στο γεγονός ότι αυτή η χρήση γίνεται από συγκεκριμένες κατηγορίες καταναλωτών και ουσιαστικά δεν αφορά τους νέους. Γι' αυτό τα επιτρέπουμε ως εξαίρεση. Ήθελα να σας ρωτήσω, κύριε, να ρωτήσω όλους τους συναδέλφους. Έχουμε δει νέα παιδιά να καπνίζουν slim τσιγάρα? Στις χώρες σας έχετε δει? Και ποιες είναι οι έρευνες που το επιβεβαιώνουν αυτό? Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ.
Oh, Görling. Mrs. Görling, 1.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I think undoubtedly we all want to see smoking reduce. It's clearly very bad for your health. As an ex-smoker myself, I can confirm it's not so easy to give it up, but once you do, it's like being unchained from a lunatic. So it's certainly something which I fully support. Today's discussions have left me with two really perhaps counterintuitive questions, because I don't want to us to take action that may have unintended effects. I want us to take the right action. And I'm still really unclear about e-cigarettes, and I wondered if I might take advantage of the speakers in the the final part of the proposals, just to ask a question about, for example, the Canadian experience on e-cigarettes and whether they actually, if they're a useful step in the health chain of helping people to give up, then I don't want us to take action that would cut that out. So I'm really still not clear on that in my own mind. And secondly, with regards to packaging and the effects of counterfeiting, that's all I'm interested in with packaging. I'm totally sold on the idea of not advertising, not making it attractive to young people, etc. But if packaging is in any way necessary, it's necessary to have space on the packaging for measures that will stop smuggling and counterfeiting, because I'm particularly concerned about the health aspects of counterfeited cigarettes, which I understand can be up to 3 times as harmful as those which are sold legally.
Vielen Dank. Jetzt bitte nur noch kurz eine Frage stellen, weil sonst haben wir nicht mehr die Möglichkeit, die Experten anzuhören und dass wir Antworten auf unsere Fragen bekommen. Chris Davis, danach Sophie Okuni und Karl-Heinz Florenz.
Just a quick history lesson. When the Commission first introduced this legislation a decade ago on this subject, it made no proposal for picture health warnings. That came from the Parliament, came actually from an amendment by myself, which then got through the committee, rejected by the Parliament. We then had a cross-party support for it coming back in, saying Member States may introduce health warnings on cigarette packs. That went through the Parliament. At 3 o'clock in the morning, in the last night of conciliation, the Commission was still opposing the introduction of picture health warnings. But we said to Member States, well, we're only saying Member States may introduce this legislation, so we did a deal and we overrode the Commission, and the following morning there was a joint press conference between the three institutions where the Commissioner of the time said that he welcomed the move, having spent 6 months doing his very best to oppose it. However, you know, we like converts. Question is on the evidence. I mean, I introduced these health warnings, I facilitated that, and I'm therefore keen that they may have an effect, and indeed for the purpose of stopping young people starting smoking in the first place. But we have heard from the representatives of the industry that there is no evidence that they have any effect. On the other hand, we also hear that there is evidence. Can anyone clarify the difference?
Thank you very much. Chris? Now Mrs. Okoni, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci pour cette audition très intéressante. Moi, je voudrais dire combien il m'apparaîtrait important que l'Union européenne, sur un texte comme celui-ci, soit courageuse. Que l'Union européenne soit courageuse parce que nous savons tous que, et vous l'avez dit à plusieurs cet après-midi, 650 000 morts dans l'Union européenne par an, 5 millions dans le monde, 50 000 en Europe qui ne fument pas et qui décèdent du tabagisme passif. Je pense que ce sont des chiffres qu'il faut vraiment que nous prenions en considération. Et moi, je trouve que l'Europe et l'Union européenne, à travers un texte courageux, gagneraient en notoriété et en image. Nous devons être courageux sur ce texte. Moi, je suis tout à fait encline à ce qu'on travaille sur cet aspect-là, que des enfants ne soient incités à travers un certain nombre de prérogatives, comme on en a parlé tout à l'heure, à fumer. Que moi j'ai 4 enfants, 2 de mes enfants fument. Quand je vais les rares fois où le Parlement européen m'autorise à aller chercher mes enfants à l'école, que je vois tous ces enfants s'empoisonner parce qu'ils veulent être comme leurs copains. Moi je suis convaincue que les éléments sur le paquet de cigarettes ne sont pas suffisants. Je pense que l'élément déterminant pour éviter que les enfants ne s'initient au fait de fumer serait d'augmenter de façon sensible le paquet de cigarettes, bien entendu, et la pédagogie et les patchs. Je trouve qu'on devrait réfléchir à quelque chose sur les patchs qui sont un moyen pour les grands fumeurs que j'ai été, par exemple, d'arrêter de fumer. Je vous remercie.
Merci. Karl-Heinz Florenz.
Ja, Aufklärung in der Tabakfrage ist natürlich wichtig. Deswegen hätte ich gern eine Frage zur Aufklärung an den Vertreter der Tabakindustrie. Sie haben als ein wichtiges Argument angeführt den illegalen Tabakkonsum, den Tabakschmuggel etc. etc. Jetzt habe ich sehr seriöse Studien gelesen, die sagen, dass die illegalen Zigaretten zu mehr als 50% aus ihrer legalen Produktion kommen, zum Beispiel aus dem neutralen St. Petersburg und dann den Weg der Legalität in die Illegalität finden. Das wäre doch mal wertvoll, wenn Sie das aufklären würden. Also wenn die illegalen Zigaretten auch noch legal bei Ihnen produziert werden, dann ist das schon für jeden Gesundheitspolitiker ein Schlag ins Gesicht. Also auf so etwas würde ich sehr empfindlich reagieren.
Vielen Dank. Kurze Nachfrage bei Karl Schlüter noch.
Yes, my question is for David Hammond. You said you had been advising governments, and one of the worries I have is the claim of the tobacco industry that it's a kind of trademark violation using plain packaging. So what are the legal advice you would give us to justify that and overcome such problems?
Ja, vielen Dank. Der Vertreter der Tabakindustrie ist direkt angesprochen worden und ihm möchte ich kurz das Wort geben und dann gehen wir der Reihe nach weiter. Bitte.
That, Mr. Chairman, is the question by Mr. Florence. I can be very brief about it. Smuggling hurts us. We have an agreement, CACA member companies have agreements with the European Commission, and under the terms of those agreements, if our product sold originally in Russia, as the example that Mr. Florence used, is seized in the European Union, we pay penalties. We pay the excise duty times 5 as a penalty. So we have a very clear incentive on top of the commercial incentive to prevent these practices from happening. The commercial incentive is, of course, that any sale of a tobacco product, of a cigarette that is smuggled, does not go to us in the first place.
Okay. Dann der Reihe nach, Mrs. Green. 2 minutes if it's possible.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, there are several points that I'd like to very quickly address, and I'm sure my colleagues will want to address them too. Mr. Leeser talked about passive smoking, and of course this is the area where the industry really went to town trying to distort the evidence and prevent governments wanting to take stronger action. But we do now have smoke-free laws in many countries, and we need to make sure those happen in other countries to protect children. There are discussions as well about preventing smoking in cars with children, but that's very much at the debate stage, and it's not really what the Tobacco Product Directive itself is about, but be sure that we are looking at that issue and think it's a very important one. On e-cigarettes, again, colleagues will have comments to make. We recognise that people are saying that they're helpful for them to cut down or try to quit. And we would like to see all non-tobacco nicotine products regulated under pharmaceutical and medicines regulation. In the UK, we are looking at harm reduction as an approach. There's 2 consultations that are going to be responded to shortly, so it will be interesting to see what comes out of them. I think the key concerns we have are to make sure that the people who need them get them, but that they're not marketed to either young people, and that they don't demotivate people from quitting. But we're aware that e-cigarettes is a big issue, but again, it's one that we don't think should come under the Tobacco Product Directive. And indeed, the WHO and the Framework Convention want more research on this area. In terms of slim cigarettes, someone asked, is there evidence? Yes, yes, and yes. We have good evidence from young people across the UK, young girls who say they find these attractive. They find these packs are things that they can pretend to their parents they're not smoking because it looks like lipstick or perfume, and they've even got flowers on the cigarettes themselves. They're clearly marketed at young girls, and they clearly are effectively marketed at young girls. We want to see them out of the way altogether. Final point from me, somebody mentioned that counterfeit cigarettes are presumed to be more harmful than the real thing. The genuine cigarettes have up to 70 cancer-causing agents in them. They kill 1 in 2 people who use them long term. Anything else that goes into a counterfeit cigarette is probably not going to kill you any quicker than a genuine cigarette is going to do. So I'll pass over to my colleagues.
Vielen Dank. Please.
Thank you. I'll try to respond to a number of the comments. On the issue of passive smoking warnings, this is an area where there is some awareness, but far from fully informed public. One challenge for regulators is the number of different smoking-related diseases that one could put on a warning. I think there are more than 24 diseases. But certainly there's consensus among regulators and health authorities that warnings on passive smoking are among the most important. Just to follow up on the comment about slim cigarettes, how do we know that they're important? I'm happy to share with you the industry reference that I have regarding the increase of sales in slim cigarettes. I was asked a question about e-cigarettes in the Canadian market. We have a very peculiar regulatory system where electronic cigarettes with nicotine are prohibited. We have the sale of electronic cigarettes and they're going up in popularity, but there is apparently no nicotine in them. I would not hold Canada up as a model. We have very little understanding of these products, and I would say that our regulatory framework is in the very early stages. I was asked a question about packaging and counterfeiting or contraband. In my experience, the tobacco industry has used the same argument as a barrier to health warnings and picture warnings many times over. That is to say that picture warnings will increase contraband cigarettes. I have not seen any example of that. We have had those warnings in place for over a decade now. and I welcome that evidence if it does exist. I was asked a question about, is there a list of all these packaging studies that I've referred to? The answer is absolutely, and I would be happy to provide that to anyone in this room. I think your point raises an important issue, which is the evidence that we're talking about should be public, it should be credible, and it should be reviewed by the scientific community. And that is exactly the evidence that I will pass on to you. I also was asked a question about, we have a difference of opinion with respect to what I've said and what the KECM representative has said about the effectiveness of warnings. If you're asking me what I think the difference of opinion, what is at the heart of it, everything that I've referred to today is being conducted by independent scientists. It is being subjected to peer review in scientific health journals. All of the information I've been aware of from the industry is by people paid by the tobacco industry, and I'm not aware of a single published study out there.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Mr. Josens.
I have to address three issues. The first one is in relation to counterfeiting. There was a concern raised about the counterfeiting of tobacco products. Well, in this proposal, you have a visible security feature. I think a visible security feature is easy to counterfeit, so I would advise you, in addition to that, to have an invisible security feature. So if you make it more difficult and add to security features, it may be a way to make counterfeiting more difficult. Secondly, in relation to the effectiveness of health warnings, I just want to add something on Belgium. Belgium was the first country who introduced pictorial health warnings in 2007. We have the data of prevalence data based on 10,000 persons done by the Scientific Institute of Public Health, and it showed that in 1997 the prevalence in Belgium was 30%, in 2001 29%, in 2004 28%. Pictorial health warnings were introduced in 2007, and the prevalence dropped to 25% in 2008. That means 3% less in 4 years' time, and in percentage of smokers, 10% less. So the data on Belgium gives an indication on the effectiveness. A last comment I would like to make about the GTI involvement in smuggling. Well, there has been a long complaint in 2001 and details and emails. And in one of the documents, the head of the GTI compliance teams wrote, I quote, "GTI management has not lived up to the zero tolerance policy of smuggling, and in those cases that touch on smuggling into or via the European Union has specifically and repeatedly violated its obligations on the European Commission Agreement of 2007. End of the quote.
Thank you very much. So, last but not least, Dr. Martina Pötschke-Langer. Please, 2 minutes.
Da die Fragen von 2 deutschen Abgeordneten des Europaparlaments kamen, möchte ich sie auch gleich in Deutsch beantworten. Es war Herr Dr. Liese und Frau Sommer. Herr Dr. Liese fragte nach der Evidenz des Passivrauchens, und da kann ich ihn beruhigen. Es gibt ausreichend Daten, sowohl auf nationaler Ebene als auch auf internationaler, die die Gesundheitsgefährdung des Passivrauchens sehr genau auch beschreiben und mit validen Daten unterfüttern. Ich stelle Ihnen sie gerne zur Verfügung. Wir haben selbst dazu auch einen Report herausgebracht. Die zweite Frage war nach der E-Zigarette, die, glaube ich, beide auch aufgegriffen haben. Und dazu ist zu sagen, wir haben gerade einen Artikel im Deutschen Ärzteblatt publiziert und haben die E-Zigarette als nebulöses Produkt bezeichnet im doppelten Sinn. Nebulös, weil es den Nebel hervorruft und ausstoßen lässt, und nebulös, weil wir eigentlich gar nicht als Konsumenten so recht wissen, was da in diesen Produkten drin ist. Und das ist unser eigentliches Problem. Es ist kein ausgereiftes Konsumentenprodukt. Es gibt keine Qualitätsstandards, was diese Applikationsarten angeht. Es gibt Dutzende unterschiedlicher Applikationsformen. Es gibt hunderte verschiedener Nachfüllfläschchen, die in einem sich ähneln. Sie enthalten die meisten enthalten Nikotin in teilweise unverantwortlich hohen Konzentrationen. Und man stelle sich jetzt mal einen freien Konsumentenmarkt vor, wo dann jeder so wild seine Nikotinfläschchen untereinander mischt und dann steht es in der Küche und dann kommt vielleicht irgendjemand rein und nimmt das Nikotin, vielleicht gibt es dann was zu essen und mischt es dann noch drunter. Sie können mit Nikotin töten. Das heißt, die ganzen Applikationsformen, die bisher von den E-Zigarettenherstellern hier angeboten werden, sind im höchsten Maße gefährlich, was das Produkt selber angeht. Was die gesundheitlichen Auswirkungen betrifft, sind es vor allen Dingen kurzfristige Atemwegsreizungen und auch Allergieentwicklungen. Das geben seriöse Hersteller selber auch an. Aber auch Vergiftungserscheinungen durch Nikotin, nämlich dann, wenn die Konsumenten zu viel an diesen E-Zigaretten ziehen. Also sie haben keine Kontrolle mehr, wie viel sie da eigentlich puffen. Und irgendwann ist dann so ein Overloading-Effekt auf den Körper ausgerichtet und dann kann man zusammenbrechen mit einer Nikotinvergiftung. Okay, das war's.
Vielen Dank, weil sonst sind wir gleich ohne Verdolmetschung. Und ich möchte abschließend unserer Berichterstatterin das Wort geben, Linda McEwan, für eine Zusammenfassung und für ein Abschlussstatement. Please, Linda.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm not going to say very much because we've had a very full afternoon of interventions. I want to thank all the speakers for coming today. I've taken very careful notes of what you've said, and there's still many questions that we can ask arising from what you said, and evidence and counter-evidence which the MEPs will be weighing up in the next few weeks. I'll remind colleagues what I said about the Framework Convention. I, as a rapporteur, will meet industry representatives, but only in meetings, and if they're here, they should note that we will make the dates available to you, let you know when those dates are. They will take place in Parliament, and notes of those meetings will be taken. So, yes, we will listen to your concerns, but in accordance with the convention. And also, I've listened very carefully to all the things that colleagues have said, and I think colleagues have taken a responsible view. They've raised the questions that have been raised with them, and I'm sure that all the colleagues in this House, I hope very much, will want to bring a law forward which improves public health and indeed stops young people becoming smokers. So I look forward to working with all of you, and I'm sure we're going to have a very productive time, and we have enough time to have a full, proper parliamentary procedure to get this law in place during this Parliament.
Vielen Dank, und ich bedanke mich bei allen Diskutanten heute, bei allen Experten, die heute uns die Möglichkeit gegeben haben, hier unsere Fragen zu stellen und auch Antworten zu geben. Das war sehr hilfreich, sehr sinnvoll. Für uns besteht jetzt die Aufgabe darin, dieses Stück an Gesetzgebung hier durchs Parlament zu bringen. Aber auch der Rat ist gefragt. Wir haben heute ja ein klares Statement vom Minister gehört, dass wir dieses Stück Gesetzgebung bis spätestens zu den Europawahlen abgeschlossen haben, dass wir einen Meilenstein setzen in der Gesundheitspolitik der Europäischen Union. Dieser Meilenstein ist notwendig, dass hier strenge Regeln herrschen, dass möglichst wenig Menschen wieder anfangen oder neu anfangen mit dem Rauchen. Das soll unser Job sein, und hier haben wir eine Berichterstatterin, die gut zuhört und die auch in der Lage ist, dieses Stück auf den Weg zu bringen. Ich bedanke mich bei allen, die heute hier waren, und wünsche allen einen guten Nachhauseweg und einen schönen Abend. Morgen 9:30 Uhr geht es weiter für die Kolleginnen und Kollegen. Dann wird hier abgestimmt.